Chapter 1527. Su Fengnian suddenly turned around and saw a group of familiar faces: Su Huang with his beautiful beard, Sima Qian who always had a bright smile on his face, Lu Duanmao with his evil-looking face, Jin Baosher with a cold expression, and an unfamiliar middle-aged man who reeked of alcohol and carried a long sword. He should be the famous wine immortal, Chang Sui. Su Huang laughed in a low voice and said, "I met Daoist Han in Purple Sun Palace, and heard that your highness has come to the mountain. So, I have to find your highness and thank you." What was supposed to be a harmonious and courteous conversation was completely destroyed by Chang Sui's arm around Su Fengnian's shoulder. After all, this fellow had directly put his arm around Su Fengnian's shoulder and said in a loud and careless manner, "I've made a trip to North Ji. And only then did I know that not only are the infantry under Yan Wenwan's command the best in the world, even the cavalry of Yuzhou is not something that the cavalry of Li Yangbie can compare with." Originally, I thought that Mr. would not let go of his old face, so I could find an excuse, saying that I was not acclimatized to Beiliang and had to rest for 3 to 4 years. But, I did not expect that Mr. would be so generous this time, even throwing Su Huang and the others to Beiliang. So, it is just nice, as we can still be together. But, I tried so hard, but it backfired. After we bid farewell in Jibei, it should be the last time I see Mr. in this life. If I had known this would happen, I would have followed him to Qingsang City in Lu Province. Su Fengnian, we are going to follow you in the future. Why don't we take this opportunity to discuss something and ask for the position of general for Su Huang? Let me put it bluntly first, a position with an unknown title is not going to work. Even if you can't be a general with real power in the border of Liang Province, you can still do it in Lu Province and Yuzhou. With my junior brother Su's full of military strategies, it is more than enough for him to lead an army of 10,000 men. That brat Sima can stay in the Liangzhou provincial governor's office as a 4th or 5th rank official. If you're a little bolder, you might as well shove him to Song Dongming as an assistant. However, you must be careful of this brat seducing the pretty maidservants of your Qingliang mountain. This brat's biggest problem is that he can't control the bird in his pants. As for junior brother Lu Duanmao and junior sister Jin Baosher, you don't have to worry. If there is no official hat for them, they can just find a place to train for a year and a half. Su Huang's face was full of helplessness. Sima Qian's bright smile became forced, while Lu Duanmao simply turned his head and pretended that he did not know this senior brother. Jin Baosher secretly glanced at Su Fengnian with a complicated expression. Since old Mr. Han was so generous, Su Fengnian, who was extremely surprised, was not a petty person. He immediately showed the swift and decisive side of a vassal king and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Su can go to the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate office first. I will personally write a letter to Chu Lushan. The military affairs in Beiliang's border have always been strict. To be honest, Su Fengnian, dare not guarantee that Mr. Su can immediately become a general in Liang Province, but I will definitely not let Mr. Su use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Mr. Sima, you can go straight to Qingliang Mountain and assist Deputy Administrator Song Dongming. Of course, if you don't like being an assistant, you can also go to Liang Province's Provincial Governor Office or Lingzhou's Taiyu County. Right now, there is a merit officer position in the Provincial Governor Office, while Lingzhou's Taiyu County has just vacated a governor. They are both 4th rank officials. It depends on how Mr. Sima weighs it. As for Mr. Lu, I hope that you can go to Lingzhou to help Provincial Governor Su Beiji. Perhaps your position will not be high at the beginning, but I believe that with Mr. Lu's knowledge and Su Beiji's foresight, Mr. Lu will quickly stand out. As for Miss Jean, I really haven't thought of a plan yet. Let me think about it, but before I go down the mountain, no matter what, I will give Miss Jean a satisfactory answer." When Su Fengnian finished speaking, Sima Qian and Lu Duanmao looked at each other in dismay. Even Su Huang was shocked. Jin Baosher pursed his lips tightly and was in high spirits. Only Chang Sui still looked sloppy. He lazily picked up his wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. He wiped his mouth and smiled. Great. Su Fengnian said sincerely, I, Su Fengnian, will of course welcome all of you to stay in Beiliang. My second sister will also be very happy. Chang Sui sighed softly. Then, other than the eldest apprentice brother who has a grudge with the Su family, and the youngest apprentice brother who has no choice but to stand against you, you have a total of 8 disciples. Currently, 6 of us are working together in Beiliang. Life and death are fated. Riches and honor are in the hands of the heavens. People come and go as they please. The 6 of us are already considered lucky. Chang Sui's last sentence was clearly said to his junior apprentice brother Lu Duanmao, who still had a nod in his heart. Among the 8 of them, Lu Duanmao had the best personal relationship with Prince Zhao Kai. Lu Duanmao turned a deaf ear. Next, Chang Sui suggested that they get together to taste the most authentic green ant wine in the world. Su Fengnian took out all of his silver and bought more than 10 bottles of wine from a vendor. Then, he led them to a nearby thatched cottage. The cottage was cleaned all year round. Although no one lived in it, it did not look decadent at all. Even the small vegetable garden behind the cottage was full of greenery. Su Fengnian moved out bamboo chairs and stools from the cottage with great familiarity. He even took out a table that was originally used to store books. The thatched cottage was not far from the elephant washing pond, but the contrast between the two was clear. This had a lot to do with Mount Wudong's intention. The group of people sat around the table in the open space in front of the cottage. Chang Sui had already begun to drink to his heart's content. Su Huang and Lu Duanmao sat side by side. Jean Baosher sat across from Chang Sui, diagonally across from Su Fengnian. Naturally, Su Huang and Su Fengnian talked about the naval battle of Guangling. When they met in Liuzhou, regarding the fact that it was just a civil war that belonged to the Guangling Navy, the two of them each had their own opinions. Just as Sir Han had said, the two of them each had their own opinions. Su Huang guessed half correctly that it was a quick battle, while Su Fengnian guessed correctly that West Chu had won the battle. As for the following situation in Guangling, Su Fengnian and Su Huang had a dispute. Su Huang, a master of the art of war who had traveled through the old West Chu several times, firmly believed that Liang would quickly form an encirclement, and West Chu's breakthrough point would inevitably be the seemingly unstoppable 100,000 elites from Nanjiang. Only by doing this could they truly gain strategic depth for West Chu and gain a firm foothold in the gap between Jiangsu and Nanjiang, and truly display the advantages of the Guangling River as a natural barrier. Although in this way, it would still be difficult to escape the predicament of being pincered by Lu Xingxiang and the Prince of Yan, but compared to desperately defending a corner of West Chu's capital city and only being destined to be nibbled away bit by the Liang imperial court, the situation was still much better. For this reason, Su Fengnian specially dug out a geomancy map of the Guangling Road from his room and slowly spread it out on the table. Su Huang held a wine cup in one hand and used the other to point out the mountains and rivers. He spoke tirelessly. Landscape painting emphasizes power, and when martial artists exchange blows, they also emphasize power. Then, West Chu's power almost reached its peak after Xia defeated Yang Shenqing and Yan Zhenchuan on the western front, Ko Jianghuai displayed his brilliance on the eastern front, and Chao Chongqing stabilized the Guangling River in one battle. However, Su Huang filled his half-empty wine cup to the brim, and then pointed to the wine bottle by his hand. No matter how powerful West Chu's power is, it is still only a cup of wine. But Li Yang's power is as big as a wine bottle. Yang Shenqing's Jizhou infantry suffered a lot of casualties, Yan Zhenchuan's cavalry was wiped out in one battle, and even Guangling Prince Xiao Yi's navy was completely wiped out. But the wine in the bottle is still more than the wine in this cup, a lot more. And this is just us talking about the military on paper, talking about the number of troops. The real general trend of Liang is that after the new emperor ascended the throne, the people of Liang are still stable, so much so that it can be said that they are becoming more and more stable. The Yonghui auspicious talisman is far less turbulent than what outsiders imagine. Therefore, in the battle of West Chu and Liang, the former can succeed in one battle, while the latter can only lose one battle. Su Huang pointed to a strategic town on the north bank of Guangling River and a pass in Jianzhou on the south bank. He said in a deep voice, "If I were Chao Chongqing, when the old general Wu Zhongshuan leads half of the Nanjiang army to cross the river, I would send a valiant general who dares to fight a tough battle and 10,000 elite troops south to cut off their retreat. Then, I would send a veteran general who is good at defense to guard the western front door, so that the Nanjiang army of 100,000 can neither fight nor retreat comfortably." Su Fingnian bent over slightly to look at the map, frowned and said softly, "The deputy commander of Beiliang's infantry, great ancestor Gu, has mentioned Wu Zhongshuan, this veteran general. He thinks that this person's command of the army is far above Yang Shenqing and Yan Zhenchuan. He also has many valiant generals under his command. Wu Zhongshuan will definitely keep an eye on his rear if he has to travel a long distance to fight in a foreign land." Su Huang shot a glance at Sima Can, who was sitting cross-legged and munching on melon seeds. The latter resentfully put down the handful of melon seeds in his hand and sat upright. He said, "Wu Zhongshuan and the group of meritorious generals by his side are all experienced men who have fought many battles. They would not be so careless. However, according to military books, it is said that they do not transport grain for 1,000 miles. This is a hidden danger of the southern border army. More importantly, it is a fatal flaw that is not something that Wu Zhongshuan and the others can solve. That is, no matter how hot-blooded and passionate the battle on the battlefield is, it has always been a silent ripple of the battle in the imperial court. Since the late emperor of Liang, no one has trusted the prince of Yanqi, Zhao Bing. The current emperor is no exception. Isn't it using northern Mang to cut down the 300,000 cavalry of northern Liang's territory, and using western Chu to cut down the 200,000 ferocious troops of southern border's territory? If Wu Zhongshuan easily took West Chu, wouldn't the officials of Great Peace City be afraid of the 100 to 200,000 southern barbarians? If they had nothing to do, they would run right under their noses to show off their might." Chapter 15:28. Sima Can couldn't help but secretly pick up a handful of melon seeds from the table again. While eating melon seeds, he said vaguely, "Beiliang's transport is trapped, and the 100,000 troops in Nanjiang are not really comfortable. Therefore, in this battle, if Wu Zhongshuan was able to defeat Chao Zhongqing, that would be because he had the ability to reach the heavens. During this period of time, the imperial court would definitely make a move." It was the same logic as when Yan Zhenchuan had no choice but to tacitly understand and take the risk to advance. Liang Imperial Court is the happiest when the battle reaches a stalemate. If they lose, they will be reorganized by Lu Xingxiang, the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition. Not a single soldier will be able to return to Nanjiang. Maybe even Wu Zhongshuan will have to enter the capital to be an official. Didn't Tangshi's sword with Liu Baijie just get demoted from the position of Minister of War to the position of Administrator? Won't Wu Zhongshuan be moved? Don't you want to compete with the newly appointed Assistant Minister of War, Tang Taizhuang? You are young, and your military achievements are not that good. You are not as famous as me. What right do you have to compete with me for the position? Besides, didn't Taiyan City say that a civil official who doesn't want to be the Grand Secretary is not a good civil official? A general who doesn't want to be the Minister of War is not a good general. Jean Bauscher stepped heavily on the guy's foot under the table. Sima Can was obviously a person who had been tortured. His expression didn't change, but he was finally not so cynical. Although the imperial court of Liang is domineering, watching the Battle of Liangmang from the other side, personally fighting with the rebels of West Chu, and deliberately playing tricks with the vassals of the older generation, I have to say that the late Emperor of Liang is really a powerful monarch. If you look at the history books, if you don't talk about the military achievements, he should be in the top 5. Let's not talk about other things. Let's just talk about the general trend of removing vassals. Let's not talk about Beiliang. That Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, went to the battlefield and died, right? Zhao Sui, the Duke of Jiaodong, has been guarding the door of the northeast for so many years, right? Zhao Sun, the hereditary king of Jing'an, also wished he could pour out his heart to the imperial court and carve the word loyalty on his forehead, right? That was why it was said that in a history book of the spring and autumn annals, it was about generals from various countries appearing on stage. Emperors and civil officials were all ridden to the side. Every page was filled with the words martial artists save the country. As for the spring of eternal Hui, it was replaced with the words literati rule the country. With Zhang Julu leading the charge and the 5 ministers outside of the Ministry of War working together, it was truly a magnificent sight. Even 1,000 years later, as long as you are a scholar, you will feel proud of this glorious history. Sima Can suddenly paused and looked around like a storyteller who was keeping people in suspense. He took a sip of wine and said, "Then, here's the problem. Why is it that on the surface, the longer Liang drags on, the greater the chance of victory, while Beimang drags on, the smaller the chance of victory? Why is it that Xiandi still insists on having Guangling Road burn, and then let Beimang feel that they have a chance to invade the south at this time? Fighting on 2 fronts, aren't you afraid that even the thickest of assets will be squandered?" Chang Sui was overjoyed and pointed at his shitty with his wine gourd. "In the future, if you can't make a name for yourself in Beiliang, then go to the restaurant and be a storyteller. Shi Xiang will set up the stage for you. Jean Shimi will take the money." Su Fengnian smiled and gave the answer. For the elite troops in the world, it is already the limit to maintain their prosperity for 20 to 30 years. After that, they will only get worse and worse, and their shortcomings will gradually increase. Our Beiliang cavalry started in the spring and autumn annals, and now it has been 30 years. First, Great Peace City is afraid that our Beiliang frontier army will not be able to fight Beimang as time passes. Second, they are afraid that our Su Fengnian will have ill intentions after he stabilizes his position and grasps power. A very simple example. If my father had said in the past that he wanted to divide the river with the Zhao family, at least half of the soldiers would have left, and the morale of the army would have fallen. But if it was during the last years of Yonghui, Su Shao, who was deeply rooted in Beiliang, mentioned this, the 300,000 cavalry would all be old people rooted in Beiliang. Not many people would leave. When our Su Fengnian truly holds power for 4 to 5 years, and has all the generals of the border army in his hands, Beiliang, who has never had a good impression of Great Peace City, will not point their spear at Liang. It will be normal in the eyes of Jing for them to establish their own country on the northwest border, right? Chang Sui laughed and said, "That's human nature." Sima Can asked with a smile, "Wang Yi, have you really not thought about this?" Su Fengnian shook his head, not saying anything. Chang Sui finally opened his mouth to talk about serious matters. With hazy drunken eyes, he said, "When it comes to the various armies in the world, there are actually not many that can be called heroic. My old foundation is the Southern Ji infantry of the Northern Han Imperial Guard, which has already been ruined by Yang Shenqing. Yan Jinchuan's cavalry was originally one of the best elite cavalry in Liang. Unfortunately, the old general died a sullen death and did not die in battle. Now, the number of soldiers left can be counted on one hand. The newly appointed administrator of Huainan, Kainan, has expanded from 60,000 to 80,000, and her military strength has decreased by quite a bit. The Minister of War, Tang Taizhuang, has single-handedly trained the elite cavalry of Liaodong's Duoyen, which is extraordinary. The Blackwater cavalry of the vassal prince of Liaoxi, Zhao Sui, is also not bad. Wu Zhongshuan's great armor of the southern frontier is said to be able to compete with Yan Wenwan's Yuzhou infantry. The king of Yan, Zhao Bing, personally leads the 40,000 Wufeng army. As for the navy, the Guangling navy has been split into 2, so there is no need to mention it. The Qingzhou navy has long been corrupted by the officials of the Green Party. If they can fight with words, they will probably be invincible. No matter how you look at it, only your Northern Liang border army has been able to maintain its sharpness for a full 30 years. Chang Sui stood up and said slowly, in the Central Plains, relying on natural barriers and cities will definitely not be able to stop Bei Mang's iron hooves. Therefore, I want to stand here in the only Beiliang frontier army that can withstand the disadvantage of numbers and not take a step back. I want to use my meager strength to block for the Central Plains. Chang Sui raised his head and drank half of the gourd of wine. At the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, there are 2 cities and hundreds of fortresses. When Bei Mang's hooves advance, it will only be after the Beiliang's defenders are all dead. Chang Sui muttered to himself, before I personally went to the border, I always felt that it was grand and majestic when I wrote poems after getting drunk. Only now do I know that the true border of 100 battles is not at all as heroic as the scholars imagined. Chapter 1529. Chang Sui said loudly, why write poems for the dead? It's better to die here and leave your last words. Sima Kan said softly, second martial brother is really drunk. Su Huang suddenly stood up and raised a cup of wine. He looked at Su Fingnian and said, to gourd mouth of Yuzhou. To tiger head city of Liangzhou. To Qingsang city of Liuzhou. A toast to the prince. Sima Kan, Lu Duanmao, and Jin Baoshe also stood up and raised their cups. Su Fingnian stood up and said softly, I don't deserve this toast. You can all drink a toast to the Beiliang who has lived up to his name for the Central Plains for 20 years. In the end, Sima Kan was so drunk that he had to look for a cup under the table. Chang Sui also sang at the top of his voice, but he was humming in the dialect of his hometown that no one could understand. Su Huang also couldn't escape this calamity. This beautiful bearded man, who valued elegance the most, drank until his beard was covered in wine. Even Jin Baoshe, who drank the least, drank until his cheeks turned red. This made Su Fingnian, who drank the most but was still sober, feel a little embarrassed. One time, when he pulled Sima Kan out from under the table, he looked up and saw the woman with smiling eyes. Su Fingnian blushed and said, I'm the only one who isn't drunk. It's a bit of a bummer. The drunk Su Shao squinted his eyes and smiled. He was already tongue-tied. I heard from the teacher that before the great general was conferred the title of prince, you came to the capital to confer a reward. After the court was dismissed, you knocked on the hat of a big shot from the Ministry of War and said that I, Su Shao, only had 600 to 700 men. In your eyes, I'm not even worth a fart. When I have 6,000 to 7,000 men in my hands, whether I can see you or not depends on your mood. When I have 60,000 to 70,000 men in my hands, you call me brother on the surface, but behind my back, you still call me a stupid old ruffian. In the end, I accidentally gained control of 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers and destroyed 6 countries. I even killed 4 emperors. What do you think? Today, I will call you elder brother, but do you dare to accept? Ha, great general, oh great general, as a martial artist of the younger generation, Su Huang, also hope to be able to gallop on the battlefield like you, and settle my grudges as I please. Su Fingnian saw the questioning gaze from the Treasury Department and said helplessly in a low voice, this is just a rumor spread by the officials of Liang. There's no such thing. If there really was such a thing, Su Shao would have bragged to me hundreds of times. Chang Sui also went crazy from the alcohol. The great general is indeed formidable, but how could Li Yishan, who relied on the scholar's strength to assist the great general, ultimately helping Northern Liang fight Northern Mang alone, be inferior in the slightest? It's a pity that Li Yishan is already dead. Otherwise, I, Chang Sui, would be willing to become his errand boy. It's a pleasure to be able to chat with him. Lu Duanmao looked around in a daze. The wine in the cup in his hand had already spilled, but he was still muttering to himself, where's the wine cup? Where's the wine cup? Sima Kan slammed the table and replied, isn't the cup on the ground? I saw it under the table just now. The half-drunk Treasury Department reached out to touch his forehead. Couldn't these brothers have a little bit of the restraint of scholars? It was fine when they were in Shangyin Academy, but why were they so unrestrained in Beiliang, a place they were unfamiliar with? Su Fingyan smiled and said, "It seems that our Beiliang's green ant wine is still the best." At dusk, in the end, Chang Sui and the others still didn't let Su Fingyan send them up the mountain. They supported each other as they staggered towards Xiang Palace. However, Chang Sui didn't forget to shamelessly ask for the northern cold saber from Su Fingyan. Jean Baosher laughed and said, "Senior apprentice brother definitely isn't drunk. Otherwise, every time he gets drunk, he would give people things. He definitely doesn't have the habit of asking people for things." Chang Sui glared and said, "Senior brother doesn't even want his life anymore. What's wrong with asking for a saber?" Then, he immediately muttered to himself drunkenly, "I don't want to think about sword chi soaring into the sky. At least I, Chang Sui, can fight like a bull when drunk." "Su Fingyan, you brat, you're not honest. Drinking depends on one's character. How can you be the only one sober when everyone is drunk? This won't do. I'll drink with you again tomorrow. Today's because my junior brothers and sisters were dragging us down." Jean Baosher said unhappily, all right. We'll talk about it tomorrow when you can get the money from Mount Wudong." Su Fingyan smiled and said, "Then I won't see you off." Jean Baosher nodded and said apologetically, "Sorry about that. Senior brother and the others are usually not like that." Su Fingyan shook his head and said, "People with temperament are the easiest to deal with. Beiliang's environment is only suitable for people like that." For some reason, Jean Baosher slowed down his footsteps and turned to ask, "Is it really like the rumors at the border? That Dong Zhuo of Beimang ordered Qi Manor, Sword Manor, and Yu Manor to set up the three great formations, chessboard, sword circle, and sitting stance. He even ordered the 100 over Kunlun slaves of Mount Bubang to control the ballista with power equivalent to a celestial sword. He even used the talisman formation, one-line sky, of Dao's sect and the Dunhuang flying apsaras of the princess's tomb. Just to stop you from breaking the formation and advancing 200 steps." Su Fingyan smiled and said, "After hearing what you said, I realized that it sounded very impressive. But actually, when I was breaking through the formation, I didn't think much of it. Moreover, I had dozens of Wu family swordsmen behind me to protect me." Jean Baosher whispered, "I see." Su Fingyan smiled and didn't say anything. The woman turned around gently and said with a light voice, "Look at yourself, look at your family, look at your hometown, look at your country, and look at the world. Look at everything one by one, leisurely and carefree." Su Fingyan frowned and fell into deep thought. As dusk approached, Su Fingyan returned to the front of the straw hut and cleaned up the mess. He moved the tables and chairs back into the house and then went to the back of the house to look at the vegetable garden. After squatting in front of the house for a while, he returned to the house and lit an oil lamp. He casually picked a martial arts manual that he had taken from the armory back then and slowly flipped through it. Late at night, Su Fingyan put down the book and walked out of the house. In the eyes of Tantai Pingjing and the other Qi refinement warriors, Great Peace City was rich with the aura of the king. Xiangfan City was eerie with the aura of ghosts. Gangnam-do was elegant and bleak. Beiliang men couldn't compose frontier poems. Beiliang women also didn't have such grievances. Death was death. Su Fingyan looked up at the night sky. A general success was built on 10,000 corpses. What Su Shao owed to Chen Qiu, I'll repay. Su Shao spent his entire life in the military. As a general, he could only kill people. There was no right or wrong. But no matter how many people he killed in the Central Plains, I, as his son, had to save that many people. And what I, Su Fengnian, owe the 300,000 cavalrymen and Beiliang citizens, I might not be able to repay in this lifetime. Chapter 1530. A huge fleet of carriages entered Beiliang's Yuzhou from Huainan's river prefecture and headed straight for Wudang Mountain. The fleet was escorted by the imperial guards who had dazzling golden threads wrapped around their scabbards. There were also nearly 20 inner palace experts who had copper-embroidered fish pouches around their waists. Behind this group of carriages, there was another group of luxurious carriages following far behind. The coachmen driving the carriages were, without exception, top-notch martial artists with long qi auras. It was the time when Liang destroyed Buddhism and promoted Taoism. In the north and south of the Yangtze River, there were new Taoist temples rising from the ground in all the geographical centers and spiritual mountains. The sound of immortal music resounded throughout the central plains. Among them, Xingyang Temple in Great Peace City was built like a forbidden palace. There were statues of the 5 emperors, including ancestor Taizong of Liang. They were placed on both sides of the statues of the Taoist saints according to the ancient order of Lizhao and Mu. They took the materials from the iridescent cloud pavilion of the imperial palace and used them to build the gate of Xingyang Temple. They broke the inner palace's sweet spring hall and used it to build the hall of Laojun. The projection wall of the temple was painted with a grand system of 36 heavenly caves and 72 blessed lands of Taoism. For a time, Xingyang Temple became the head of all the Taoist temples in the world. The head of the temple, Wu Lingsu, was the Taoist who personally sealed the gate of the 2 Zen temples. She was now worthy of being the head of the northern Taoist temple. Therefore, there was a saying in the world, Xingyang Temple in the capital, ancestral court in the north and south. Just when everyone knew that the white-robed monks of the 2 Zen temples were going to debate with the Taoist priests of Wudang on Lotus Peak, there was another news that the Yue minister who was like the sun in the sky in Great Peace City was going to rush to Beiliang's Wudang Mountain as the head of the imperial court with an imperial edict in his hand. He was going to confer the title of Wudang's supreme leader, Huang Manshan, as a void-pierce master. A middle-aged Taoist with an otherworldly aura was sitting in the carriage. He wore a purple-gold Taoist robe and had a purple horsetail whisk with 3 golden rings on his arm. He was smiling faintly. Beside the honorable Taoist sat a young man who looked very similar to him. Although he was also wearing a Taoist robe, he was closer to the secular world than the middle-aged Taoist. The young man said with a smile, "Father, I thought that after crossing the river province boundary marker, the Yuzhou military would at least send out a few hundred cavalries to intimidate us. It seems that Su Gai isn't completely lawless. He's still very wary of father." The middle-aged Taoist was none other than Wu Lingsu, who had risen rapidly in Jing. He remembered that when he had just arrived at Great Peace City, the nobles of the city all liked to use his title of Qingqing King to make fun of him. Occasionally, when they met at a banquet, who did not call him Wang Yi, but did not bother to disguise the disdain in their eyes? Fortunately, the bitter days were over very quickly. He had failed to live up to expectations at Mount Longhu and was repeatedly tormented by the young man surnamed Su. A certain mysterious Taoist who lived in seclusion at Mount Longhu had died and his Tao had vanished. This even angered the previous emperor and the new emperor. In addition, Li Yang was an irresistible trend. Finally, Wu Lingsu was able to transform into a dragon as soon as he encountered the wind and cloud. He forcefully stepped on Mount Longhu and the 2 Zen temples to reach the peak of power. Among all this, his wife in name had secretly taught him. Although the two had not actually been husband and wife, even though Wu Lingsu had become the head of Taoism in the northern lands, he still held her in awe. Wu Lingsu glanced at his only son, Wu Shizhen, and felt somewhat dissatisfied. He, the official prefect of Chongxian of the court, had gone to Mount Wudang to issue an imperial edict. What was this brat pulling in a bunch of Great Peace City wastrels to follow behind him? That first young master Wang Yuanran, his old man Wang Xiongui had already been pushed from the position of Minister of Revenue to the position of Administrator of the Guangling Path. First my ass. If it wasn't for the fact that Tantanon still remembered the incense from the spring of Yonghui, with Wang Yuanran's shrewdness and ability, he would have long been eaten to the bone. There were also the other 3 young masters of Jing. Which one of them had any real weight? That pervert surnamed Yen at least had the famous general grandfather Yen Jinchuan. Even if Great Peace City did not give face to the monk, they would still give face to the Buddha. They would more or less not bicker with this brat. But that little fatty called Song Tianbao, none of his ancestors had ever been an official or studied. He just relied on his father's wealth to spend money in Jing. Every day, he was a sucker for other people. He was just a silly little fool. Could this kind of rootless wealth last long? It was just 100 zhang tall building built on sand. When the wind blew, it could collapse at will. Wu Lingsu said earnestly, Shizhen, in my opinion, the sons of the aristocratic families in the capital are also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. For example, although Wang Yuanran's father, Wang Xiongui, was demoted from a first-class official to the most dangerous position, the administrator, in the future, the 6 ministries will serve outside the capital for a few years before returning to the capital. As the only remaining pillar of Zhonglu, it is a good thing that one person cannot support the situation. Wang Xiongui may have a chance to make a comeback. Wang Yuanran also has Tantanon to take care of him. Father will not oppose you getting to know him. But compared to the eldest son of Yin Maochen, Yin Changing, and the only son of the Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, Han Xingyan, Wang Yuanran is much worse. He can't even compare to Fan Zhongho, Li Jifu, and Gao Tingshu. As for that Yen family brat who doesn't amount to anything, his family is just like a half-dead person hanging on by a breath. That is why you. Let's talk about Zhao Wenwei, Yin Changing, and Han Xingyan. These 3 people's fathers were all Grand Secretary Zhang's favorite students, and then they had the foresight to part ways a long time ago. The father's generation has a good official reputation, the younger generation's reputation isn't bad either. Even if I try to stick hot face to cold buttocks, they might not necessarily agree. Even if I thicken my skin and enter their homes, I still won't be able to become their close friend or confidant. Rather than this type of futile effort, I might as well spend a bit more effort on people like Wang Yuanran. Wu Lingsu sighed and said, small matters, it is hard to accomplish great things. Wu Shizhen said with a bitter face, I actually want to get close to that Qin Xiaobao, but he doesn't even give you, father, face, so why would he pay me any attention? Wu Lingsu reached out a hand to stroke the horsetail whisk's vermilion silk, saying softly, us father and son's foundation is still a bit shallow. Wu Shizhen leaned over to this new leader of Northern Taoism, saying with a low voice, Father, if we can take advantage of this opportunity to trample on that surnamed Su and return to the capital, Father's position in His Majesty's heart will definitely rise a step further. Taking a step back, I can find an opportunity to secretly push Wang Yuanran and the other hotheads out to make a feud with Beiliang. Once they return to the capital and make a ruckus, the Su family's reputation in the capital will be completely ruined. Wu Lingsu was hesitant. That person even dares to refuse an imperial edict, and this is also his territory. How can Wang Yuanran and the others shake him in the slightest? As for the curses of Great Peace City's officialdom, the Su family father and son have never paid them any attention. Be careful not to smash your own foot with a rock. Beiliang's whisk water room spies can fight with Liang's Xiaogo for many years without being at a disadvantage. They cannot be underestimated. Wang Yuanran and the others can't accomplish anything. I don't think they will succeed. Wu Shizhen said with a smile, I don't expect that Su person to be hurt. It's also good to disgust him. Wu Shizhen remembered the scene of him being humiliated by that peer at Mount Qingqing. His tone was dark as he said, even if Su person has some information that he can use against him, would he really dare to kill over such a small matter? Wu Lingsu suddenly asked, in the group behind us, the one surnamed Lu, the son of the county chief of Hizhou, said that he used a scabbard to hit Su person in the past. Is that true? Wu Shizhen said with schadenfreude, it's most likely true. According to what Lu Qingfeng said, Su Fengnian was traveling the Jianghu with an old servant. They passed by Hezhou and had a conflict on the street. In the end, he used the scabbard of a cold blade to smash Su Fengnian's forehead. That guy also said that Su Fengnian threatened to bring 10,000 Bailiang cavalry to raise Hezhou. So Lu Qingfeng asked him who he was, and Su Fengnian asked him back, Su Shao is my father. Who do you think I am? Lu Qingfeng, of course, did not believe him. After hitting Su Fengnian with the scabbard, he simply pulled out his blade and chased after him for half a street. Last year, I heard from the storytellers in the restaurants in the county that Su Fengnian was His Royal Highness. He really did travel the Jianghu with an old servant, by long. He was scared to death. Especially when Su Fengnian refused to accept the imperial edict and sent the Yuzhou cavalry to invade Hezhou. Not only Lu Qingfeng, but also his father and his whole family ran out of the city. Afterwards, when they saw that the Yuzhou cavalry had no intention of invading Hezhou, they returned to the county with fear. Wu Lingsu also found it interesting and said with a smile, but later, wasn't there an incident where 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry entered Jizhou? They had to pass through Hezhou. Wu Shizhen laughed so hard that tears almost came out of his eyes. So the family resumed their old business and ran away at night. Fortunately, the Yuzhou cavalry returned through Huluku, so Lu Qingfeng's father did not resign and moved to Jiangnan. However, the Lu family also benefited from the disaster. The entire Hezhou knew about this hero who dared to beat up the king of Bailiang. Even Lu Qingfeng's father received a unique, above-average in Hezhou in the local evaluation hosted by Yin Maochen. Lu Qingfeng and Song Tianbao are good friends who have known each other for many years. When he was welcoming Wang Yuanran and the others, he fell in love at first sight with the daughter of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Plus, he was probably sure that Su Fengnian would not lower himself to his level, so he shamelessly followed him to Yuzhou. Wu Lingsu, who was no longer a self-proclaimed king in a corner, sneered, "It is rumored that Song Tianbao's grandfather, as the #1 god of fortune in the two Liao provinces, was not on good terms with Su Shao, who rose in Jinzhou and Liaodong." Lu Qingfeng and Wang Yuanran, who had a conflict with Su Fengnian in the Jiuzhou embassy in the capital, are indeed birds of a feather flock together. Wu Shizhen's expression was a bit awkward. It seemed that he had to be included. Chapter 1531. The first round of the debate between Buddhism and Taoism was going to be held at Lotus Peak tomorrow. There were no more places to stay on Mount Wudang. The inns in the towns near the foot of the southern divine path were also full. The two groups of people entered a place called Escape Summer Town. The way they looked for rooms to rest was completely different. One group of a dozen people spent a lot of effort to negotiate with a small inn on the east side of the town. The normal rooms were much more expensive than first-class rooms in the Central Plains. When the innkeeper took the stack of travel passes, he just glanced at them and ignored them. So what if they came from Great Peace City? Wouldn't they still be slaughtered by our inn? However, the names of these guests were not vulgar. The middle-aged man with the sword was Qi Jiajie. It was Yin Changying and Zhao Chenyuan, a young couple who looked like a perfect match. The handsome young man was called Zhao Wenwei. The two scholars in green were called Han Xingyan and Gao Shilian. The rest of them looked like retainers and servants. Their parents didn't pay much attention to their names. The other group of 20 or so people went directly to the best inn in Escape Summer Town. When they heard that it was full, one of them threw down 500 taels of silver without hesitation, saying that he wanted to book the entire inn. The old innkeeper was annoyed by the young people's bureaucratic tone. He thought, so what if it's 600 taels? My inn is charging 100 taels a day according to the market price. You people want to stay for 3 days. 500 taels is nothing. The innkeeper rolled his eyes and said that the inn was doing business. There was no rule to chase away customers. The young man with the river province accent took out another 500 taels without saying anything. The innkeeper reached out and touched the thick stack of brand new banknotes. He began to feel conflicted. The young man waved his hand as if he was afraid that others didn't know that he was rich. His helper immediately threw out 2 large gold ingots. The innkeeper looked and thought, "Silver is the father and gold is the lord. Since we're meeting these elders, let's not talk about manners." However, the innkeeper still wanted a yard after taking an inch. He said that the 30 or so guests were all staying. He was afraid that the staff wouldn't be able to get them to move. As soon as he said this, a few people reached out and grabbed the hilts of their swords. The innkeeper was anxious and hurriedly told them not to fight. "Whoever dares to cause trouble in Bailiang today will be finished." The innkeeper picked up the banknotes and gold ingots and went upstairs to explain to the customers. The innkeeper played a petty trick. Not only did he take the initiative to return the money, he even gave everyone 3 to 4 taels of silver. He even told the customers that a group of military lords from the northern Liang border wanted to stay here and that the innkeeper could not afford to offend them. Jianghu. Bailiang. Jianghu. Jianghu. Jianghu, 2. Bailiang. Qi Jiajie. He was the #1 swordsman in the capital. In his early years, he was not only the sword master of many princes. Even Bai Yan's daughter, Zhang Gaoxia, was once his disciple. To be able to trouble him to escort a group of people thousands of miles away, the reason was simple. If any one of these young people were thrown into Jiangnan, they would all be people that high officials and nobles would do their best to curry favor with. This was because their family elders were the deputy of the head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, the former minister of appointments, Yin Mao Chen, the former #1 prime minister, Gao Shiji, the Duke of Yen, and Han Lin, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Among them, Yin Maochuan's eldest son, Yin Chongqing, and Zhao Yuling's second daughter, Zhao Chenyuan, were husband and wife. The fathers of both families had strongly opposed it. In the end, the emperor, who was only the 4th prince at the time, set them up and married. It was a beautiful story in the capital. Zhao Wenwei, who had the reputation of being a child prodigy, was Zhao Yuling's favorite son. Han Xingyan was the second son of Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, who was about to be sent out and promoted to administrator of Huainan. He was about to marry a virtuous county princess. Gao Shilian and Gao Shiqing were the son and daughter of Gao Shiji, the Duke of Yen, in his later years. They had always been doted on by the Duke. Fortunately, the brother and sister had always kept a low profile in Great Peace City. Gao Shilian and the son of Great Pillar State Gu Jiantang were close friends, while Gao Shiqing and Zhao Chenyuan were close friends who had played together since childhood. It could be said that these young people were the most outstanding children of officials in Liang's officialdom. The provincial governor of Huainan province was Kai Nan, who used to be Gu Jintang's most trusted general. Han Lin was about to be promoted to administrator of Huainan province, so they would have a lot of dealings in the future. Gao Shilian and Gu Jintang's 2 sons were also very close. There were many things that the big shots could not sit at the same table and talk cheerfully, and it was even impossible for them to have a tacit understanding. However, if a junior who did not see the big picture came forward, it would be much smoother. At this time, they were all gathered in Yin Chongqing's room. The window just so happened to be facing the street. Han Xingyan stood at the window and looked at the Bailiang cavalry slowly passing by on the street. He smiled and said, "Just by watching a leaf fall, you can tell that the Bailiang frontier army is really terrifying." Gao Shiqing joked, "Oh, now that you're the son of a second-rank administrator, your guts have grown by quite a bit. You even dare to say good things about Bailiang." Han Lin raised both his hands, indicating that he was willing to be beaten and scolded. Gao Shilian could not help but feel indignant for Han Lin. He stared and said, "You talk without thinking, how can you marry?" Gao Shiqing glared back at him and said, "Shut up, Gao Shilian muttered his catchphrase in a low voice, having a sister like this, I'm really out of luck. Gao Shiqing, who yearned for chivalry the most, fiercely pressed down on the hilt of his sword and threatened, Are you looking for a beating? Yin Changing, who was the oldest and the most mature in the group, said helplessly, You can drink tea, but if you want to quarrel, go outside. Zhao Chenyuan, who was brewing tea, waved at Gao Shiqing. Zhao Wenwei, who was still a teenager, asked with a laugh, Brother-in-law, why did Wang Yuanran and the others arrive at the foot of Mount Wudong before the Wu family's master Daoist? Yin Changing softly revealed the secret. Master Wu deliberately slowed down his pace and waited until the last day of the Lotus Peak debate before ascending the mountain to issue the imperial edict. The reason why he was in such a hurry before was because he was afraid that the Yuzhou army would come out to obstruct him, so he missed the best opportunity. Since the Yuzhou army has not made any moves, he can take it easy. The small town was so small that one could see the scene in the west from the east just by sticking one's head out of the window. Han Xingyan frowned. It seems that Wang Yuanran and the others are stirring up trouble again. It's fine if they're in the capital, but why won't they stop when they're in Beiliang? Yin Changing said calmly, Let them be. Gao Shilian leaned against the window and glanced out. He angrily sneered, They're making quite a scene. As expected of the capital's 4 young masters traveling together, they're full of style. This bunch of vermin lying on their father's books of merit. It's one thing to enjoy a good life, but they still want to harm others. If they become high officials in the future, what else can they do besides bring disaster to the country? Yin Changing frowned, Be careful with your words. Gao Shiqing made a face at her brother, Did you hear that? Big brother Yin also wants you to shut up. Gao Shilian put his palms together and silently muttered, Heavens, oh heavens, hurry up and throw down a man to marry this girl. Zhao Wenwei stuck out his chest, Second brother Gao, what do you think of me? Am I worthy of sister Gao? The corner of Gao Shilian's mouth twitched. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Gao Shiqing slapped the child's head, This old lady changed your diapers in the past. Yin Changing smiled, All right, don't make a fuss. Sit down and drink some tea. This is one of the few tales of spring deity lake tea we have. Chapter 1532. As soon as Gao Shiqing sat down, she immediately stood up and giggled, No, only a fool would not join in the fun. I have to go to the other side of the town to take a look. As she said this, Gao Shiqing carefully looked at Yin Changing, who always spoke softly but was the most decisive. Yin Changing raised his head to look at her and slowly said, We agreed in the capital that it would not happen more than 3 times. It has already happened twice in the capital and Jinan. If it happens again, you have to return to the capital immediately. Gao Shiqing smiled brightly and said, Understood. Gao Shiqing ran out of the inn like a wisp of smoke and ran along the street to the most popular inn in the town. She did not go too close. After all, she was not unfamiliar with Wang Yuanran, Yen Se Fetus, and Song Pandun. Especially since the Yen family residence where Yen Se Fetus lived was their neighbor. Gao Shiqing respected old General Yen Jinchuan very much, but she hated this eldest grandson of the Yen family who was upright at the top but crooked at the bottom of the tree. After old General Yen sacrificed his life for the country, an exception was made. During this period of time, Yen Se Fetus's tail was raised to the sky. He actually had the guts to ask the elders of the family to propose marriage to the Duke Yen family. Gao Shiqing almost couldn't help but find someone to put this guy in a sack and throw him to the bottom of the lake. In Gao Shiqing's vision, Yen Se Fetus did not disappoint. After coming to a small town like Beiliang, he still flirted with good people. He was currently surrounded by 2 young women with a group of bad friends. Gao Shiqing was a little surprised. Didn't people say that women in Beiliang were mostly tall and strong? The 2 young women in front of her were very beautiful. The young woman who carried a sword like her was probably above average and could not be considered stunning. However, the other one was quite outstanding. The brothel of Great Peace City was known to be filled with outstanding beauties. Gao Shiqing had disguised herself as a man a few times to go there to broaden her horizons. Even those courtesans did not have the moving beauty of the tall woman in front of her, especially her unapproachable aura. As long as it was a man who wanted to win, he could not help but challenge her. No wonder Yen Sei fetus jumped out in such a hurry. However, Wang Yuanran was not present. He should be hiding in the inn overlooking the street. Yen Sei Zun gently twirled the sandalwood fan in his hand and chuckled. Big brother is a scholar, and has never done unscrupulous things like snatching common women. But Big Brother is naturally hospitable. I just want to invite you two sisters into my building to drink tea, recite poems at night, and admire the moon. Big Brother is from the capital, and has long been curious if the moon in the northwest is as round as the moon in Great Peace City. Sisters, it shouldn't be difficult for you to give me some face, right? The woman with the sword was so angry that she laughed, "Give me face my ass." Yen Sei Zun laughed and said, "You're really shrewish. So it's a wild horse from the northwest. Big Brother likes it a lot." The woman with the sword was about to draw her sword and slash at the man when her companion pulled her back. It turned out that a group of Bailiang's most notorious Jin cavalry had already rushed over. The rider who looked like a sergeant asked in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" The sword-wielding woman pointed at Yen Sei Fei and his group of young masters and said angrily, "Hedonistic sons of rich parents from the capital, in broad daylight you want to..." Yen Sei Zun innocently interrupted the woman's words, "What do you want?" "I didn't do anything, I just chatted for a bit." The Jin cavalry sergeant's face was gloomy. His palm subconsciously pressed against the handle of his Bailiang saber at his waist and looked down at the group of young men from the capital. "Then are you done chatting? If you're done, then scram back to the inn. If you're not done, then continue. I'd like to listen in." Yen Sei Zun, who had never been treated this way in the capital, gritted his teeth and smiled lightly. He turned his head and glanced at a young man standing beside Lu Qingfeng. That young man braced himself and took 2 steps forward. He squeezed out a smile and said to the Jin cavalry sergeant, "My father is the old governor of Yozhou's Huanggang County. My big brother is the former 8 Pass commandant. We're all on the same side." The Jin cavalry sergeant said expressionlessly, "Even the current governor of Huanggang County can't control me, let alone the previous governor of Huanggang County. As for the 8 Pass commandants, they're just miscellaneous, right? Nowadays, even miscellaneous generals don't count in Bailiang, so what's the 8 Pass commandants? On the same side. Who the F***ck is on the same side as you?" Seeing this scene, Gao Shiqing was a little dumbfounded. If this was Li Yangbia's place, the local tyrant's son would have appeared, and that petty official would have to bow and scram obediently. It wouldn't be strange for him to cling to the powerful and become the villain's accomplice. The Jin cavalry sergeant turned his head and smiled at the 2 Bailiang women. "Are you 2 ladies looking for a place to rest? If you can trust me, I know of a Yuting inn on the other side of the street. There might be 1 or 2 rooms left, but the price isn't cheap. There's no helping it. The rooms left in the inn's hands are all superior rooms that they've decided to rip off. If you 2 ladies have enough money, you can consider it." The woman with the sword smiled and said, "Brother, thank you." The Jin cavalry sergeant glanced at the group of unfriendly bastards from the capital and said softly to the 2 women, "I'll send you off." At this moment, a tall young man next to Yen Sedan sneered and said, "Bailiang barbarians." The Jin cavalry sergeant, who had already turned his horse around, suddenly pulled on the reins and dismounted. He said to the other sergeant, "Ma Biao, you guys take these 2 ladies to the Yuting inn." This squad leader took off his light armor and cold saber and hung them on the horse's back. Then he turned around and stared at the young man who had called them barbarians of northern Liang. He limped forward and said, I have taken off my armor and cold saber from my pottery cart. Today I am not a brocade horseman on duty." The tall young man laughed and said, "What, King Cripple, you want to fight me one-on-one? I'm afraid I'll accidentally use too much strength and break your other leg." The man surnamed Tao laughed. "If you can kill me, it'll just be because you're capable." The tall young man curled his finger. In the hut not far from the elephant washing pool, Su Fengnian was moving books and drying them. Suddenly, the Yuzhou lieutenant and the spy leader of the Fu Shui Fong appeared together. Su Fengnian, who was squatting with a book open, raised his head and smiled. "If you have something to say, say it." The leader of the spies spoke very quickly, but his words were clear. Reporting to Wang Ye, at the foot of the mountain in Fuxia town, 64 Jin cavalry and 27 Fu Shui Fong death warriors are confronting 23 people led by Wang Yuanran, the youngest son of Guangling's Dean of Dao. The cause is... Su Fengnian waved his hand and ordered the lieutenant, Luo Hongkai, go down the mountain and lead 500 men to Fu Shui Fong. Don't confront them, just fight to the death. Su Fengnian pondered for a moment and then continued, the other side should have quite a number of martial art masters as bodyguards. Sui Taizhan, you take out the 4A-class Fong Fushui men of sacrifice currently on Mount Wudong and send them down the mountain with Captain Luo. Luo Hongkai asked carefully, Your Highness, are we really going to fight to the death? Su Fengnian smiled. How can we do that? Su Fengnian quickly added, just beat them half to death. After this matter, people will give a thumbs up to Beiliang for treating guests with courtesy. The two men quickly left. Luo Hongkai rubbed his chin and said, Old Sui, our prince is indeed a scholar, right? Sui Taizhan said unhappily, what's the use of telling me this? Why didn't you flatter him in front of the prince? Luo Hongkai, who was striding forward, rolled his eyes and said, just say yes or no. Sui Taizhan wiped his mouth and smiled. Of course. Chapter 1533. Escape Summer Town. Escape Summer Town. Escape Summer Town. Just from its name, one would feel refreshed. However, at this time, it was very angry. In reality, of Wang Yuanran's group, in terms of appearance, other than the grandson of the old General Yan Jinchuan, who looked like a villain, the rest of the group, including the tall young man who had seriously injured the captain of the Jin cavalry, only had a slightly arrogant attitude. They did not look like villains with a belly full of evil tricks. The four silent elders of the family also had the style of a great master. On the side of Beiliang, there were more than 60 patrolling Jin cavalry on the streets of the small town. They all wore light armor and only carried cold knives. They did not carry bows or crossbows. The Jin cavalry captain who was in charge of the affairs of the three towns at the foot of Wudong Mountain, Escape Summer Town, had a sturdy body. However, he had a pair of small eyes. When he squinted, they seemed to disappear from his face. He supported the captain of the Jin cavalry, whose chest was full of blood. The latter had been punched in the chest by the tall young man and flew back several feet on the street. It was clear that he had suffered serious internal injuries. Without 2 or 3 months of recovery, he would not be able to do anything on duty. The reason the Jin cavalry captain did not act on impulse and order the 60 brothers who had accompanied him to attack the enemy was because the enemy had many hidden aces. Even with the help of the Fu Shui Fong spies, they might not be able to gain an advantage. In addition, the young man who had injured the captain had already announced his identity. He was the son of Li Yang's Sagxing field captain. Sagxing field captain was one of the 4 field captains in the capital and had real power. His rank was not very high, but he was a strong candidate for the 12 great generals of Li Yang's 4 campaigns, 4 garrisons, and 4 pacifications. The commandant of the imperial cavalry, who had just turned 30 years old, was a descendant of a general of northern Liang. He had long been influenced by the filth of the hedonistic circle and was very familiar with it. When there was trouble, the main character would generally not come out and make a ruckus. He felt that it was beneath him and needed a handy henchman to stand up for him. The young man whose father was the shooting sound commandant belonged to this group. To be able to have such a good general of Great Peace City act as a helper, the other young masters who did not show any fear in the face of more than 60 Bailiang cavalry had to have a high status. This Imperial Cavalry Commandant's immediate superior was the Horned Eagle Commandant, Luo Hongkai, who was in charge of the military affairs of the 3 nearby counties. Commandant Luo had long since left a ruthless message that this time, the conflict between Buddhism and Taoism held by Lotus Peak was related to Bailiang's face. Those who came to Mount Wudang to join in the fun were either officials or scholars. Those young ladies were all delicate young ladies from respectable families. They were all timid and couldn't withstand the torment. When you see these people, you bunch of rough men should be more amiable. It's best if you give them a smile. When you need to give them directions, you should speak nicely and not be impatient. In short, if any bastard dared to embarrass Bailiang in front of outsiders, then he, Luo Hongkai, would make him lose a few layers of skin. The Imperial Cavalry Commandant was in a difficult position. Although he only needed to say one word and this Wuxia town would really start fighting, and if the 60 Imperial Cavalry couldn't win, there were still Commandant Luo's 2,000 elite soldiers at the foot of Mount Wudang. However, since he was the commandant in charge of 200 Imperial Cavalry, he couldn't be so impulsive. If he beat up the son of a shooting sound commandant, then so be it. If there were 1 or 2 sons of court generals with the surname Jinping, or if he accidentally crippled the sons of high officials of the 6 ministries, then the matter would blow up. In the end, would the king really have to personally clean up after them? However, the Imperial Cavalry Commandant was sullen and angry. Thinking about this group of bastards who had come from Great Peace City to show off their strength, it was fortunate that they weren't Baimang barbarians. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to be so hesitant. Today's matter was clearly started by the nobles of Jingdo. Wu Zhangtao's ox cart was already tolerating enough. If he had been the one to see that scene, he probably would have pulled out his sword and chopped them down without another word. Who dares to bully the women of Bailiang? Wang Yuanran let out a soft breath. Fortunately, the commandant was someone who understood the big picture. Otherwise, if the 2 sides really started fighting without any regard for the consequences, then his secret plan would not be easy to clean up. Wang Yuanran's gaze swept over the people around him. He saw the subtle expressions of his companions. Yan Tongshu's body trembled slightly. There was both the fear of facing the legendary Bailiang soldiers and also the excitement. The entire Great Peace City was cursing him for being a lecher who couldn't be supported. It was the famous General Yan Jinchuan of the spring and autumn period who had killed too many people and committed too many crimes that he had received retribution. This was why he had such a useless grandson to support the face of the Yan family. However, if he, Yan Tongshu, could safely return to Jingdo this time, who wouldn't say that he was a hero who dared to fight the Bailiang army? Who would dare say that he was a coward? The son of the shooting commandant Li Shogua, Li Zhongliang, was in charge of guarding the northern part of Jingdo. The most famous person in Jingdo wasn't the high-ranking commandant Li, but Li Zhongliang's brother Li Chang'an. He was only in his early 30s and was already a corps general among the permanent generals of Liang. More importantly, Li Chang'an was a 4th-ranked general and was one of the first generals promoted by the emperor after he ascended the throne. Li Zhongliang himself had followed Yang Xinqing and Yang Huchen's Jizhou army down south to quell the rebellion last year. Unfortunately, the Yang army was defeated one after another and became the laughingstock of all the civil and military officials. Other than the peerless General Yang Huchen who had lost an arm, no one in this army was rewarded for their contributions, regardless of whether or not they had achieved anything. Li Zhongliang, who had personally taken the heads of more than a dozen West Chu rebels on the battlefield, also fell silent because of this. Why would Li Zhongliang act today for Yan Tongshu, whom he had always looked down on? The loyalty of a friend. That was underestimating Li Zhongliang, whose father and brother were both heroes. Before this person left Jingdou, his family had been secretly trying to help him enter the Duoyan elite cavalry that the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taihuang, had built in Liaodong. However, Assistant Minister Tang had always been vague about this. He said that now that he didn't lead troops, his words might not be useful. Who would believe that? In the second year of Xiangfu, the Duoyan elite cavalry that had won a number of small battles on the border should be called the elite cavalry of the Tang family, right? However, in order to avoid suspicion, the Tang family was afraid that Tang Taihuang, would attract criticism in the Ministry of War, so the new commander of the 16,000 Duoyan elite cavalry used a border general whose surname wasn't Tang. However, that guy was slowly promoted from a sergeant to a commander by Tang Taihuang. As long as Li Zhongliang made a statement in Beiliang today, Tang Taihuang, who was Gu Jintang's right-hand man along with Kai Nan, would understand without needing Li Zhongliang to say anything in Great Peace City. A Duoyan elite cavalry that everyone was jealous of was already a lieutenant. Wouldn't that be in Li Zhongliang's pocket? Song Tianbao seemed to stare dumbly at that tall Beiliang beauty. Wang Yuanran laughed coldly inside. Learning from Yan Tongshu and pretending to be a pervert. That Yan Tongshu had brought 3,000 taels of gold into Jingdou last year. In just half a year, he had squandered it all. Just for Yan Tongshu alone, he had bought the first spring of several young courtesans in Great Peace City. You fatty, you can't even forget your friends when you see a beauty, so don't pretend to forget your life when you see a beauty. In the second year of Xiangfu, you claim to have stolen 5,000 taels of gold from your father. Based on your father's shrewdness, not to mention stealing 5,000 taels of gold from Liaodong without anyone noticing, I'm afraid without his consent or tacit consent, you, kid, would have a hard time even stealing a single copper coin. Fatty song, ever since you entered Jingdou, in this year, relying on my, Wang Yuanran's, Yan Tongshu's, and the others' names, your father probably earned far more than 8,000 taels of gold. Wang Wani, the daughter of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang Zhua, was famous in Jingdou. The old assistant minister had 8 sons. In the end, he had a daughter in his later years, so he gave his daughter this name. Wang Wani's appearance was passable, and her figure was very good. Unfortunately, her temperament was questionable. After all these years, how many poor scholars had she seduced that had the potential to become a carp jumping through the dragon's gate? Did she really think of herself as a fox immortal in a supernatural novel? Those poor scholars who could only stay in the temples in the suburbs of Jingdou, when they were reading at night, suddenly floated in from outside the window. Everyone was confused and infatuated. At this moment, Wang Wani was staring at the tall woman from the northern region, who looked like a real fox fairy descending to the mortal world, as if she was her enemy. Seeing that the situation was under control, Wang Yuanran became increasingly calm. His line of sight leaped over the Beiliang cavalry, discovering that Yin Changying and the others had already arrived by Gao Shiqing's side. When Wang Yuanran saw these people, he obviously couldn't help but feel complicated. Last year, his father was still a minister who had the potential to take over Gu Lu's authority from Grand Secretary Zhang. However, even if his father wasn't transferred to the chaotic Guangling path, during that storm that shook Jingdou, after Wang Yuanran provoked Zhao Chenyuan and beat up Han Xingyan, he was still brought by his father to kneel outside Zhao Manor for half a day. Even now, Wang Yuanran still didn't feel like he was in the wrong. It was Zhao Chenyuan, this fickle woman, who had let down her childhood sweetheart first. In the end, she ran off to become the wife of that surnamed Yin, saying that she and Yin Changying loved each other, that it was she who let down Wang Yuanran's brother who was publicly acknowledged as gentle and honest. In reality, wasn't it because she saw that the Yin family's future prospects were good, especially since Yin Maochen was going to take over her father's heavenly official position as Minister of Personnel? Zhao Yuling, this old man, had occupied the Ministry of Personnel for more than 10 years, grasping the authority to promote all of the officials under the heavens. Did he really not have a bit of shit under his seat? Could he really wipe it clean before heading to the secretariat? If Wang Yuanran could, he wanted to run up to Zhao Chunyuan and give her a slap. Then, he would expose Han Xingyan's past in front of the Gao siblings. You brat, you only have this much prospects. You clearly love that Gao Shiqing, but you don't even dare to say it out loud. You can only obediently follow the matchmaker's words and marry that county princess Zhao. Wang Yuanran's relationship with Han Xingyan wasn't bad. Last year, when he punched Assistant Minister Han's son in the face, wasn't it also because he lamented over his son's misfortune and anger? In the end, Wang Yuanran's line of sight stopped on Yin Changging's body. His gaze was exactly the same as the one Wang Wani looked at that Beiliang woman. Chapter 1534. Yin Changging, what a great talent that everyone thought highly of. Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trust, gentleness, respect, frugality, it all seemed to be in one person. Was there really such a perfect young talent in the world? Wang Yuanran did not believe it, but from Zhao Yuling to Yuan Gua to Han Lin, and even Wang Yuanran's father Wang Xiongui, this large group of Yong Hui's famous ministers who came from Gu Lu, who did not praise Yin Changging. Wang Yuanran suddenly laughed. There really was someone who thought the same as him. And it was someone Yin Changging wouldn't have guessed even if he was beaten to death. That was the important minister of the three dynasties of Liyang, Tantanon, Huanwen. Wang Yuanran was afraid of many people in his life, but the only person he respected was Tantanon. So when Tantanon told him to go to the Imperial College to reflect on his mistakes, Wang Yuanran directly refused his mother's urging to stay and really went to the Imperial College to reflect on his mistakes. When Wang Yuanran was about to leave the Imperial College, there were already rumors that Tantanon intended to abdicate and that Zhao Yuling or Yin Maochen was very likely to enter the Manxia province. When the undercurrents were surging, the old man personally went to the Imperial College to see Wang Yuanran. Before leaving, Tantanon said something that Wang Yuanran thought he would never forget in his life. Brat, being a person is like flipping through a book and reciting scriptures. Not to mention this old man whose neck is in the yellow earth, even your father Wang Xionggui's age is half buried in the earth. He has almost flipped through the book to the end and can't find anything new. But a young man like you is different. There is an old saying that every family has its own difficult scriptures, but no matter how difficult it is, you should be sensible. You have to read it well and read it well. The reason why I'm talking nonsense with you is that when I, Huan Wen, was young, I was also like you, idling around. But the old saying that a prodigal who returns is more valuable than gold is not a lie. Of course, Wang Yuanran knew that the little Zhenren Wu Shizhen had an ulterior motive. This was nothing. Not to mention those in the distance, just Li Zhongliang, Song Tianbao, and the others who were nearby were all smart people. Acting so rashly was all for the sake of getting what they needed. To be able to make it to their level, even the infamous Yan Tongshu wasn't a fool. Song Tianbao wanted to rely on Yan Tongshu's identity as Yan Zhenchuan's grandson to raise his banner. Other than freeloading and sleeping with courtesans for a whole year, how much money had Yan Tongshu secretly earned for the Yan family who had always been cash-strapped? At least 200,000 taels. Otherwise, do you think old General Yan's posthumous body could pass the Board of Rights meeting so smoothly? The more he re-examined the people around him, the more Wang Yuanran began to understand that it was not easy for his father to become an official. Therefore, although Wang Yuanran could not help his father return to the capital as an important official, at the very least, he could win some reputation for his father. All of a sudden, a pleasant surprise came. Probably sensing the difficult situation of the Beiliang cavalry, as one of the parties involved, the Beiliang woman with a sword, reported her identity. It turned out that her father was Song Yan, the son of the Lingzhou provincial governor. As the second in command of the civil officials in Lingzhou, he could be considered one of the top officials in Beiliang. Song Yan's daughter, Song Huangmei, pointed the tip of her sword at Li Zhongliang, the son of Colonel Shooting Sound, and said angrily, "Compared to officials, is that so? What's so great about your father's bullshit, Colonel?" Wang Yuanran could not help but laugh. Now that Beiliang had cut a large number of surplus generals and colonels, as long as they did not hold military power, they did not even have the right to hang the Beiliang saber when they went out. However, the colonel of Li Zhongliang's father, Li Shogua, was indeed quite amazing. He was now a fourth-rank official, comparable to Song Yanzizhou. Furthermore, this Colonel Shooting Sound did not dare to say that he would immediately become one of the 4 generals of the 4th expedition, but as long as he operated it well, after 4 to 5 years of smooth sailing, he would definitely become one of the lower-ranked generals. Furthermore, his brother had a private nickname of Little Chen Wang in the Liyang military circle. In front of Li Zhongliang, this Colonel Shooting Sound was still not enough. The pervert Yen Tongshu first snickered, and then laughed even more exaggeratedly. This hedonistic son of a rich family had the ability to make a man tremble. He held a fan in one hand and covered his heart with the other. "Brother, I'm scared to death." Yen Tongshu finally stopped laughing. He curled his lips and said, "Don't even talk about Izhou. The provincial governor is just a so-so." At this time, the cold and elegant woman who had been indifferent to the farce finally spoke. She turned her head and said softly to the commandant of the Imperial Cavalry, "My father is Administrator Li." The commandant of the Imperial Cavalry was stunned. The woman smiled sweetly and said softly, "Yes, I also have a younger brother called Li Hanlin. He is now the commandant of the Liangzhou crossbowmen." In the Beiliang military, whether it was the garrison troops or the border troops outside the Great Wall, most people had heard of the name Li Hanlin. It was even more effective than the number 1 civil official in Beiliang, Li Gongda. The commandant of the Imperial Cavalry smiled knowingly at first, but he became more and more conflicted. Today's matter was really not a matter of whether the 2 sides were high or low officials. He was an insignificant commandant of the Imperial Cavalry in Beiliang. It was not because he was worried about his background that he did not dare to give the order to beat those bastards into a pig's head. It was because the war at Liangmang was so intense that he, the only son of the Imperial Cavalry, had no chance to go to the border to kill the barbarians because his father and mother had dragged in all the elders of the family to pester him. However, his father had been a military officer at the Great Wall of Yuzhou and had always paid attention to the general situation. As the commandant, he knew quite a bit about the relationship between Beiliang and the Liyang imperial court. The more this was the case, the more he could not make trouble for Commandant Luo or even the prince and implicate Beiliang in an even more dangerous situation. He turned his head to look at his subordinate, Sergeant Tao Che, who was unwilling to leave no matter what. Even this old brother of his knew the severity of the matter. He had taken off his armor and saber and was going to fight with Li Zhongliang as a Beiliang citizen. How could he act rashly? Tao Che was once a sergeant of the Beiliang crossbowmen. Like Li Hanlin, he was also an elite scout responsible for clearing the path for the Dragon Elephant cavalry up north. His left leg was severely injured in battle and he had no choice but to retire from the crossbowmen. According to the rules of the Beiliang Frontier Army, he could have served as a deputy in the local garrison. However, Tao Che refused no matter what, saying that he was an old cripple and that he would be satisfied if he could return to the local garrison as a sergeant. That one call of the Beiliang barbarians. For an old soldier who had probably spent half his life fighting the Beiliang barbarians to the death, it was too hurtful. The Imperial Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda lowered his head and said softly to his old brother who had returned from the Liangzhou border, "I'm sorry." Yen Tongshu opened his fan with a snap and smiled. What's the saying again? The temple is small and the wind is strong, but the water is shallow and there are many bastards. Who would have thought that I would be able to meet both the administrator and the daughter of the governor while casually strolling through the streets of this small town? What, you want to use your power to bully people? You want to use your private army to kill us good people? Wang Wani was instantly amused. Using power to bully people and good people, these two phrases coming out of Yan Tongshu's mouth really had a different flavor. Wang Yuanran and Li Zhongliang both had calm expressions. The more powerful the Beiliang side was, the more cheers they would receive in the capital in the future. However, the four experts beside them were a lot more nervous. With the combined strength of 2 master-level experts and 2 level 3 experts, not to mention 60 to 70 cavalry, even 200 to 300 cavalry wouldn't be a problem. However, if they really met the daughter of the Beiliang administrator, then it would be the same as angering the daughter of the Grand Secretary in the capital of Liang. At that time, it might alert the large-scale regular army here. Who started the bloody policy of Liang's 20 years of Jianghu? Wasn't it the old Liang Prince Su Rintu? Moreover, it was said that the Su Fengnian who had just fought with Tuoba Bodhisattva was on Wudang Mountain right now. At that time, not to mention protecting the safety of these young masters and ladies, they might not even be able to protect themselves. Not far away, Gao Shiqing also smiled and said, "This Yan Tongshu isn't stupid to the extreme. This way, the Beiliang cavalry will either retreat with their tails between their legs, or they will have no choice but to use their power to bully people and kill innocent people." Gao Shilian snorted coldly and said, "If I were the Imperial Cavalry Commandant, I wouldn't waste my breath. Even if I don't kill people, I would hang Yan Tongshu up and beat him up." Chapter 1535. Yin Chongying shook his head and said, "Northern Liang is in a dilemma. If we don't completely fall out with them, we won't be able to capture Yan Tongshu and the others with an army of at least 600 riders and a few martial experts protecting them." Gao Shilian said unhappily, "To be able to make Beiliang suffer a setback once, won't they be treated as heroes when they return to the capital?" Yin Chongying smiled. "Let's go, we've seen the show. You guys really wasted that pot of Spring God Lake tea." At this time, the streets of the small town rumbled like thunder. Even Zhao Chenyuan felt a suffocating pressure. When a group of black-armored cavalry charged into the small town, there were constantly archers dismounting from their horses and climbing onto the roofs to occupy advantageous terrain. In this small town, there were no more than 400 to 500 soldiers on the streets and archers on the roofs, but they formed a black cloud that could destroy a city. The leading general took the lead, urging his horse to gallop to the side of the Jin cavalry commandant Fan Xiangda. Sitting high on the back of the Liangzhou horse, he angrily rebuked with a gloomy face, surnamed Fan. "Are you sunbathing here?" Fan Xiangda didn't know what to do. He was about to speak when the Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai scolded, "Bastard, how can there be a Beiliang army that doesn't draw their sword when facing an enemy? If the prince hears this and knows that I raised a nest of bear soldiers, how can I still be a captain?" Luo Hongkai looked around and said in a low voice, "Unrelated people, leave the streets. You will not be treated as an enemy if you're late." This Lieutenant Luo was probably really angry at that Fan Xiangda, but he was his trusted aide after all, so he left some face for the commandant of the brocade cavalry. He turned his head slightly and spat before suddenly raising his arm and saying in a clear voice, "Patrolling brocade cavalry, retreat. Hippogriff cavalry, get into formation. Draw your swords." Luo Hongkai stared darkly at the group of people and grinned out of habit. His teeth were especially white and frightening. If anyone escapes without reason, the archers will kill them on the spot. The streets of the small town weren't wide. Logically speaking, it wasn't suitable for cavalry to gallop through. However, it wasn't hard for a cavalry to charge through. It wasn't like they were going to collide with those orderly infantry formations, so they could do whatever they wanted. The Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai had around 3,000 soldiers under his command. He only had 500 cavalry. He had always been very careful. He begged and asked his superiors for more than 800 B-grade warhorses from the Beiliang horse farm. In the local army, other than the first-class captains who guarded the dangerous passes, this was already a shocking achievement. For the captains of Yuzhou and Lingzhou, where most of the soldiers were infantrymen, to have 200 B-grade warhorses was already a miracle. Of course, the reason why Luo Hongkai was so capable was because the king of Beiliang had personally led 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry from Ji Bay to Hulu's mouth. Thanks to the prince, the Beiliang horse farm, which usually didn't pay much attention to the garrison troops in Liangzhou, had finally changed their view of the garrison troops in Yuzhou. Within the scope of their responsibility, they would give priority to warhorses to Yuzhou, which was never known for its cavalry. As for the captains of Lingzhou, they could forget about it. Who asked Yuzhou to have a Luandao who fought side by side with the prince? Do you have one in Lingzhou? Yan Tongshu was probably so scared that his legs had turned to jelly. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling. Even though the 4 experts who had quite a reputation in Liang Lake walked out and stood in front of them to protect them, this eldest son of the Yan family still couldn't help but tremble. This time, he was finally not as flirtatious as before. The son of the county chief of Huzhou, Lu Qingfeng, had a long face. He even had the thought of dying. I just want to marry an assistant minister's daughter as my wife to bring honor to my ancestors. How can you Beiliang kill people just like that? Li Zhongliang, who had experienced the toughness of the battlefield, was probably the calmest one among them. He was sizing up all the details of this regular army in Beiliang. The 2 local playboys of Beiliang who had joined the group to run errands for the rich and powerful in the capital almost turned around at the same time, wanting to escape into the inn. However, the middle-aged man who was acting as a guard instructor for the Li family suddenly reached out his hands and pulled the 2 back. Then, 2 arrows flew through the air. If he didn't pull them back from the gates of hell, then the 2 pitiful creatures would have been nailed to the back by the arrows. If they were lucky enough to survive, they would be heavily injured. Wang Yuanran finally couldn't hold back and said angrily, "You Beiliang really dare to kill people on the street for no reason?" The Hippo Hawk captain, Luo Hongkai, didn't waste his breath on him and waved his hand. The cavalry started to charge. An old expert who was the stabilizing force behind the scenes in the Yan family attacked first. The old man was a true second-grade master. If it wasn't for the fact that he suffered a fatal injury on the battlefield when he was middle-aged and coughed non-stop every time it rained and even breathing was painful, the old man might have already been a first-grade King Kong or even a mysterious finger realm expert. After the old man was saved by Yan Jinchuan from the battlefield, he stayed in the Yan family to repay his kindness. In the capital, he had the nickname of the Half-Chi River Crossing. It was said that although the old man had difficulty breathing when he was sick, when he was facing an enemy, his earth energy was extremely dense and he was also very skilled in martial arts. The old man faced a Hippo Hawk cavalry that charged at him, and he was just about to smash the warhorse's head with his palm when a wisp of a strange figure suddenly flashed out from the side. The figure's hands pushed lightly on his chest, and it actually pushed him back to where he stood on the spot. Just as the old man exhaled, he had no choice but to take another breath. The slightly wrinkled clothes on his chest trembled and returned to normal. He wasn't the only one. The other 3 experts from his camp all tried to block the rider's path, but they were all blocked by someone else. Even though the 8 of them clashed 4 times in the blink of an eye, each with their own advantages and disadvantages, this gap allowed the horned eagle rider to reach Yan Tongshu, who was standing at the outermost edge. When the rider brushed past Yan Tongshu, the northern cold saber that didn't seem to be swinging left a large wound on the shoulder of the stunned Yan family's eldest young master. Fortunately, Li Zhongliang pulled Yan Tongshu back. Otherwise, the wound would have been on Yan Tongshu's neck. After the first rider, there were still hundreds of riders coming from behind. Li Zhongliang, who didn't want to get too deeply involved, had no choice but to fight personally. He took 2 steps forward, bent his back and twisted his head to dodge the blade on the back of the horse. Then, he slammed his shoulder into the side of the warhorse, sending both the rider and the horse flying. However, the third rider didn't give Li Zhongliang any chance to catch his breath. Li Zhongliang took a series of quick steps, turned around, and grabbed the rider's arm that was holding the blade. Li Zhongliang roared angrily and dragged the rider off the horse, throwing him towards the fourth rider. The latter didn't even put away his blade. Instead, he leaned his body to the right and dodged it. Then, he still managed to stab Li Zhongliang with his blade. Gao Shilian, who was following the crowd back to the inn, saw this scene. Although he wasn't part of the situation, he was still very worried. He said softly to Yin Chongjing, "Are we really going to leave like this? From the looks of it, this Bailiang cavalry really knows how to kill." Yin Chongjing hesitated and finally stopped. He looked at Li Zhongliang and the others in the distance, who were already in danger. His expression was heavy. The group stopped under the eaves. Gao Shiqing said angrily, "These Bailiang people are too much. How can they kill people on the street in front of so many people? Is there any justice in this world? Wang Yuanran is the son of an administrator. He didn't do anything heartless. How can the Bailiang cavalry just kill him like that?" Yin Chongjing didn't say anything. He knew that it was probably because of the sensitive identities of Wang Yuanran and the others that the Bailiang didn't hesitate to go to war. Under certain rules, the imperial court made things difficult for the Bailiang. The Bailiang could endure it, and had endured it for 20 years. However, the Bailiang couldn't be humiliated. The corner of Yin Chongjing's mouth lifted slightly. He walked out of the eaves and said softly to the window on the second floor of the inn, "Thank you, Mr. Qi." The next moment, the streets of Escape Summer Town were filled with sword qi. The coldness of the sword qi instantly made the name Escape Summer Town more appropriate. However, before Gao Shiqing, Zhao Wenwei, and the others could sincerely sigh at Qi Jiao's profound swordsmanship and magnificent sword qi, they suddenly felt a bone-piercing coldness come and go in a hurry. It was gone just like that. Then, without them noticing, a young man with a book in his hand was standing next to them. It was as if he had just been reading at home and didn't have time to relax before coming out to join in the fun. There was only a slight breeze on the streets of Escape Summer Town. It wasn't enough to flip the pages of the book. However, Zhao Chenyuan and Gao Shiqing, who were more observant, saw that the young man had just turned a page of the book. Chapter 1536. A middle-aged man stepped over the threshold of the inn. Such a simple movement made Yin Chongjing and the others feel a breath like a spring breeze. The man was wearing a white robe with a jade belt. The sleeves were narrow and the body was wide. The robe was made of Sichuan brocade, a first-class tribute of the Liang dynasty. The collar and sleeves were inlaid with fine and delicate brocade with golden edges. The big part was simple and elegant, but the small part was noble. Probably only this kind of refined man with a hidden edge could marry the rouge girl with the reputation of peach blossom horse and pomegranate skirt when he was 20 years old. The middle-aged man had a long sword hanging from his waist. The scabbard was black and simple, as if it was made from the skin of a python. But what was really strange was that the sword did not have a sword guard or hilt. Qi Jiajie, the #1 swordsman in the capital. Since he was 9 years old, he started practicing with the family heirloom sword Ban Xiang. In the past 30 years, he traveled north to the two Liao provinces, south to Jianghuai, east to Jianshi, west to Jianghe, and visited all the famous mountains and rivers in the world. During this period, Qi Jiajie changed to the sword Setting Sun at the age of 18. He challenged 6 grandmasters of the sword, including Donghua sword pool suzerain Song Nianqing, Guangling Spring Snow Building's chief minister Chai Qingshan, and Tangxi sword Saint Lu Baijie. He lost all 6 battles and returned to the capital for closed-door training. When he came out at the age of 26, he changed to the killing sword Smelly Tang. At the border of Liaodong, he single-handedly fought 800 Beimang cavalry and retreated unscathed, chopping off more than 300 heads. At the age of 30, he changed to the sword Changyu. It had no edge and no hilt, so if he held the scabbard upside down, the sword would slip out of the scabbard. Since ancient times, the long sword in the world had been called Changyu. Qi Jiajia's intention in changing to this sword was obvious. There were millions of long swords in the world, but only one, Changyu, was enough. As a result, Qi Jiajia and that northern Mang sword energy that he had changed his name to be close to yellow-green were known as Qi Shu Yellow Path, respectively viewed as the successors of Deng Tai, A and Li Chuangong's successive sword gods. After Xianyuan Qingfeng, Qi Jiajia was ranked as one of the top 10 experts of Liyang. His ranking was even higher than Chai Qingshan, who had returned to the Donghua sword pool to assume the position of suzerain. What made Qi Jiajia even more famous was that the purple dress of Mount Hui, who was known for her loftiness and arrogance, had publicly said, "Mr. Qi's realm is 1 foot lower than mine, and when it comes to killing, I'm 10 feet lower than Mr. Qi's." This directly caused Qi Jiajia, who had not shown his sword for many years, to reach the peak of his reputation, vaguely gaining the status of the #1 expert of the northern land in Jianghu. Seeing Mr. Qi come out in person, Gao Shilian and the others felt relieved. In the minds of these juniors in Jing who had heard the name Qi Jiajia since childhood, even if the sky fell, Mr. Qi would be able to hold it up with one sword. Although they had guessed that Mr. Qi's previous release and withdrawal of sword energy was mostly related to this unknown young master beside them, so what? There had always been a saying in Great Peace City that Mr. Qi's true strength was not in his current realm of the sword, but in how Mr. Qi's cultivation would be higher than yesterday's. Especially when Liu Baijie resigned from his post as Minister of War and left to take up his post elsewhere. Qi Jiajia had sent him off and even gifted his sword to him. Liu Baijie, the Tengshi sword Immortal, smiled and said, "Maybe in less than 20 years, I won't even be worthy of being Mr. Qi's sword disciple." Qi Yanglong's knowledge, Tantanon's seal engraving, Qi Jiajia's swordsmanship, and now the chess skills of Li Yang's chess saint, Fan Zhongho. Of the millions of people in Great Peace City, who would not be proud? When the young master who had come with the book saw Qi Jiajia walk out, the two exchanged a look. Compared to the young man who had a leisurely attitude and always had the ability to find irrelevant details in the wind and waves, Gao Shiqing found to her shock that Mr. Qi had taken the famed sword from his waist for the first time and held it in his hand. At this time, a group of people quickly came from the east end of escaped summer town. Zhao Wenwei, who was young and lively, couldn't help but look over. There were 4 people in the group, men and women of all ages. He only had his eyes on one person. As they came closer, the youth could finally see the person's appearance and could not move his eyes away. It was a woman of the same age who had just started to show signs of being outstanding. Her face, which had some baby fat, was thinning. A beauty with an oval face floated out of the water. Her robes were as white as snow, and she carried a white scabbard longsword on her back. She also had a simple red sandalwood hairpin on her head. The hairpin was like a sword that flew through her hair. In this moment, Zhao Wenwei was mesmerized. The saying that there were beauties in books was a lie. How could they be as beautiful as the real woman outside the book? Everyone had their own eyes. Gao Shiqing's first eyes were on the handsome young master in green robes and holding a sword. She exclaimed, "Li Bai of the Donghua sword pool." Li Bai was not only famous in Liang Lake, but also in Jiangnan and even in the officialdom of the capital. Li Bai's teacher was Song Nianqing, the head of the Donghua sword pool. His family was a distinguished family. In the past, the top 10 magnates of the spring and autumn period valued family status the most. Except for the intermarriage of the 10 families, even some of the imperial families who were not of orthodox birth disdained to form an alliance through marriage. However, the Li family that Li Bai belonged to could become the next best marriage partner of the 10 magnates. In the spring and autumn period, there were only 8 families that received this honor: Li, Pei, Yu, and Xia. Among them, the Pei family fell into silence after the Shenzhou continent sank. The most famous person in the family was actually a woman, Pei Nanwei, the concubine of the old king of Jing, Zhao Heng. Li Bai's temperament showed the gentleness and elegance of a noble young master in Liang. With a charming smile, he looked at Gao Shilian and Gao Shiqing and said softly, "I didn't expect to meet Brother Gao and Miss Gao in the northwest." Since it was Li Bai who came from the Donghua sword pool, then the identity of the tall old man beside him was revealed. He was Chai Qingshan, one of the few great masters of the sword in the world. Presumably, Qi Jiajia's majestic sword qi that filled the small town had attracted this group of people. After Chai Qingshan entered the small town, he did not look at Qi Jiajia, who was at the same level, but at the young man holding the book. Li Bai ignored the strange atmosphere under the eaves of the inn and introduced to the Gao siblings with a smile, "My martial uncle Chai was a good friend of the holy monk of the Dragon Tree in his early years. When he heard that the white-robed monk was going to preach at the Lotus Peak, he specially brought us to Beiliang. As for these two children, they are martial uncle Chai's beloved disciples, Song Tinglu and Shan Yi. What are you waiting for? Quickly call Brother Gao and Sister Gao." Chapter 1537. The handsome young man, who was not tall but had an extremely long sword on his waist, responded with an "Oh." He politely greeted Brother Gao and Sister Gao, and then continued to stare at his peer with vigilance. He was furious. This guy wants to stick his eyes on my junior sister. What does he want to do? Does he want to take my sword? Only when Song Tinglu looked at Zhao Wenwei did everyone notice that he was staring at the girl in white with a strange name. Zhao Wenwei's sister, Zhao Chenyuan, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her silly brother, who only liked to read, practice, and paint with his father since he was a child, finally had his first awakening of love. Zhao Wenwei asked softly, "Your name is 321. The girl, who had long been accustomed to this kind of thing, said indifferently, "My surname is Shan. I'm not 321. Today, the girl in white simple and polite words were remembered by Zhao Wenwei, who would die of Wenjin in the future, for a lifetime. Song Tinglu snorted coldly, "Brat, don't try to get close to my junior sister. I can beat 100 weak scholars like you down without using my hands. When the time comes, beat me up. Don't say I didn't warn you." After such a commotion, the three boys and girls, each with their own thoughts, gathered under the eaves, which were slightly hostile after the strange young man and Qi Jiajia appeared one after another. Suddenly, the atmosphere relaxed a little. The scholar, who had just closed the book and tucked it under his armpit, suffered such an unexpected calamity for no reason. Not only was he not angry, he even smiled and gave the young Song Tinglu a thumbs up. The seemingly naive Zhao Wenwei said happily, "You know it even if I didn't warn you. You're also a scholar." Yin Chongying gently knocked on his brother-in-law's head and scolded, "Learning to read and write can't be used to argue." Standing under the stairs, Chai Qingshan looked at the young man under the eaves. His scholarly aura was not as good as Yin Chongying's, and his Jianghu aura was not as good as Li Bai's. However, even Qi Jiajia and Qi Jiajia, two gurus, still couldn't suppress this person's potential momentum. Only Li Bai, who had reached a high level in Jianghu, could slightly sense it. Yin Chongying, Gao Shilian, and others were not Jianghu people after all. Shan Yi suddenly asked curiously, "You have sword qi on you. Are you also a swordsman?" The man took out the book from under his armpit and waved it. He said with a smile, "Green Water Pavilion sword practice record of 60 years. Have you heard of this secret manual?" The girl nodded solemnly and said, "I've heard from my master that there are many swordsmanship manuals in the world, and the Green Water Pavilion has the reputation of being the best. It's a pity that the author's aptitude is limited and can't catch a glimpse of the scenery above the Xian finger level. Therefore, it only has momentum, but not spirit." That person lamented, "When I first used Green Water Pavilion to practice my swordsmanship, there was an old man who commented on this book, and it was similar to what you said. Chai Qingshan finally opened his mouth to speak. He said in a low voice, I didn't expect that the parting with Li Chungang by the Guangling River would be the last time I see him. That person put away the book again and said slowly, if it weren't for Great Master Chai's obstruction and the fact that he was not as skillful as he was, I and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat would have been able to walk up to the reviewing platform by the river. Chai Qingshan said expressionlessly, it's a matter of loyalty to the emperor. At that time, I, Chai Qingshan, was a guest of the Spring Snow building in Guangling. Of course, I had to stop Li Chungang. As for how I stopped him and whether it was honorable or not, I didn't care so much. Qi Jiajie's words were shocking. Lord Chai, is there a first come, first served rule? Chai Qingshan, who came from the southeast to the northwest this time, did not bring a long sword. The old man glanced at Qi Jiajie's sword, long sword, and did not speak. Yin Chongying gently held his wife Xiao Chuanyuan's hand to ease her tension. The person beside him was the northwest vassal king Su Fengnian. Zhao Chenyuan was a socialite from a noble family in the capital. She had also heard countless legends about this person. He had traveled to Liang Lake twice, went to Beimang alone once, traveled to the west regions twice, and fought in Beiliang once. How many high and mighty masters in the world had died in the hands of this young man? Back then, Ren Tu led the army and rode horses to Jianghu, trampling the courage of half of Jianghu. As for the son, he smashed the Liang River Lake, which had been flourishing with great difficulty, into a mess almost all by himself. Martial Emperor City had become a thing of the past. Yang Taisui died at the Iron Gate Pass. Catman Han Xingxian died suddenly. Song Nianqing died in a foreign land. Master Lu Hao suddenly disappeared. Xiao Lingzhen of the Spring Invitation Cottage in Shishu died for no reason beside the Spring God Lake. Zhao Ningxin, the young genius of the Taoist master residence in Longhu Mountain, was beaten to the ground. Gao Shilian and Han Xingyan swallowed subconsciously. They looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. Even Gao Shiqing, who was not afraid of anything, quietly took a few steps back. Su Fengnian, who had rushed from Mount Wudong to the escaped summer town at the foot of the mountain, did not feel as if he was facing a great enemy when facing the two sword masters, Qi Jiajie and Chai Qingshan. He turned to look at the bloody battle on the other side of the street and turned back to look at Gao Shilian who was standing beside Yin Chongying. You are the son of Duke Yan, Gao Shiji. My spy from Fu Shui mentioned that you would come to Mount Wudong with Qi Jiajie and the others. So when Qi Jiajie released his sword energy, I came. Other than telling Qi Jiajie not to do anything unnecessary, I also wanted to thank you. Gao Shilian, do you still remember that martial addict Kong? He was a young man from Beiliang who went to Tai and City earlier than Yan Qiji. Now he is working in the Ministry of War. I heard that when he first came to the capital, he was bullied a lot. It was you, Gao Shilian, who helped him. Later, Yan Qiji followed Yan Jieshi and Yan Dongwu to the capital. You were also the first person from the capital to hang out with Yan Qiji. Gao Shilian did not feel the slightest bit flattered. In fact, this duke's son even had the thought of killing himself. I, Kong Wu Qi, and Yan Qiji felt like old friends at first sight. I have nothing to do with you, the Prince of Northern Liang. Please don't thank me. You, Su Fengnian, should just knock me out with one punch. Otherwise, when I return to the capital, rumors will spread all over the capital. Won't that bad-tempered father of mine break my legs? But Gao Shilian sadly found that he only dared to listen and could not say a word. Qi Jiajie asked, Are you done? Su Fengnian shook his head and said, No hurry. It just so happens that I am waiting for someone here. What, are you going to stand up for Wang Yuanran and his group of playboys? But let me say this first. No matter how much trouble they make, it is still the same. For example, that Lu Qingfeng who sneaked into the capital from Hezhou, the grudges from his early years are in the past. Wang Yuanran, who fought with me at Jiujiu Embassy in Tai and City, is about the same. But if you, Qi Jiajie, intend to interfere, then their originally insignificant debt will be counted on you, the number one swordsman in the capital. Su Fengnian smiled for no reason. If we really want to calculate, there is indeed a debt between us. Qi Jiajie clenched the famous sword he had been with for more than 10 years. He was calm and composed. He laughed and said, "Let's do it together." The young man, Xiao Wenwei, clenched his fist and waved it quietly. Mr. Qi was indeed Mr. Qi. Even when facing one of the 4 Grand Masters of martial arts, the King of Beiliang, he was not inferior in terms of speech, momentum, or the style of a master. Su Fengnian, who had his back to the inn and was facing the street, did not look sideways. He said softly, "Okay, then please draw your sword first." Chapter 1538. As soon as he said this, Yin Chongying, Han Xingyan, Li Yibai, Song Tinglu, and Shan Yi were all shocked beyond words. To Qi Jiajie, who had the potential to become the Grand Master of swordsmanship, he said he couldn't even draw his sword out of the scabbard. Perhaps in Jianghu for 1,000 years, only ancestor Lu, who passed the gate of heaven but never entered, could say this. This guy with a book under his arm, was he trying to oppress others with his power? Although Qi Jiajie didn't dominate the martial arts world with his abundant qi, he was able to become the best swordsman in the capital. His strength was close behind the 14 Wu judges. It would be ridiculous if he couldn't even draw his sword. It was clear that a battle was imminent, but Chai Qingshan, who was inexplicably involved in the center of the storm, didn't move. He didn't intend to take Li Yibai and his 2 disciples away, nor did he circulate his qi to prevent any accidents. Obviously, if Su Fengnian and Qi Jiajie were to fight freely, there wouldn't be much difference whether they were in or out of the town. Chai Qingshan must have bet that the confrontation between the 2 would be a gentleman's fight. The 2 sides would form a tacit agreement to fight within a square inch, so as not to implicate the people in the town. How could Chai Qingshan miss such a rare opportunity to train his mind in martial arts when he had a certain level of insight and experience as a bystander with a certain level of expertise? How could Chai Qingshan miss such a rare opportunity? Qi Jiajie tilted the famous sword Chang Dao, which was cast from the Jinglong sword furnace. It was 3 feet and 3 inches long. His 5 slender fingers didn't reach out to draw the sword, but the Chang Dao suddenly sounded like a dragon's cry. Less than an inch out of the scabbard, the yin suddenly felt a cold wind blowing against their faces. This time, after a slight stop, the Chang Dao's length suddenly increased to more than 3 inches. The Chang Dao left the scabbard twice, both times very smoothly. But in this world, things could be done once or twice, but not thrice. The Chang Dao didn't move at all. The 3 people from Donghua Sword Lake, who had sharpened their hearing after practicing martial arts, could already hear the constant sound of mosquitoes and flies flapping their wings. Yin Chongying and the others also noticed that outside the eaves, on the streets of the town, dust gradually flew into the air, forming land tornadoes. They spun slowly, like a group of women in yellow dancing gracefully. Finally, at an extremely slow speed that even Gao Shiqing could see with the naked eye, the longsword left its sheath by another inch or so. However, Qi Jiajie's Sichuan brocade robe, which seemed to be untainted no matter where he was, began to tremble slightly, like a dragonfly touching the surface of a calm lake, causing ripples. Under the scorching sun in escaped summer town, the place where Qi Jiajie stood under the eaves of the inn happened to be alternating between light and dark. Originally, it was difficult for ordinary people to perceive the light, but now it was not only clearly visible, but also distorted in an instant. Song Tinglu and Shan Yi blinked at the same time, thinking that their eyes were playing tricks on them. However, after blinking, those strange lights were indeed like snakes. At the same time, the small tornadoes on the street shattered and dissipated. The saber finally came out of its sheath another inch. Gao Shiqing was completely unaware that she was already sweating profusely. The black hair on her temples was wet and stuck to her crimson cheeks. Zhao Wenwei also subconsciously loosened her fists and spread out her palms to wipe the sweat on her robe. The white-clothed girl with a sword on her back was also an outsider, but in fact, she was more nervous than Gao Shiqing and the others. She whispered to the boy of the same sect, Song Tinglu, "Do you think Qi Jiajie's sword can be completely unsheathed?" The sword at his waist was actually 4 feet long. Song Tinglu thought for a moment and solemnly said, "Call me senior brother, and I'll tell you the answer." The young girl wore a sword-shaped red sandalwood hairpin, and her willowy eyebrows were as thin as swords. Therefore, when she frowned, she appeared particularly heroic. However, the young girl quickly smiled brightly and sweetly called out, "Senior brother." The boy shivered as if he had seen a ghost during the day. He then pretended to be stupid and laughed. "The answer is, I don't know." Given the girl's temper, if it was in the past, she would have already drawn her sword and slashed the future sect master of Sword Lake until he ran all over the mountain. However, today, she took a deep breath for the first time and let Song Tinglu go. The latter soon understood the reason behind it and rolled his eyes. Compared to Zhao Wenwei's irritation when she glared at her junior sister in the past, the boy, who was quite energetic, had suddenly turned into a frosted eggplant, and he looked listless. There was no helping it. Her junior sister had to carefully maintain her ladylike image in front of her, as well as a certain person that almost all the other senior sisters and junior sisters of Sword Lake admired. Her junior sister was a person who would have probably never come into contact with yellow rouge in her entire life. However, after arriving in Yuzhou, every time she saw a cosmetic shop on the street, she couldn't move her feet away. At that time, even if she had to make a scene, she should have told her master not to agree to come to Beiliang with her junior sister. After the dust that had created the small tornado dissipated, it was blown up by the wind. Su Fengnian waved his hand and gently scattered it. Qi Jiajie bent the fingers of his sword-wielding hand and turned it into an illusory grip on the saber. The saber spun rapidly, as if thunder was rolling in his palm. Seizing the opportunity, the saber was forcibly pulled out of its sheath by 3 inches. However, a spider web appeared on the bluestone floor under the northern sword hero's feet, and the cracks continued to expand and extend outwards. Gao Shilian was so frightened that he hurriedly pulled Zhao Wenwei back in a hurry. The young couple, Yin Chongying and Zhao Chenyuan, both saw Sir Qi's white robe begin to flutter. Then, the movement became louder and louder, flapping in the wind like a war banner on the battlefield. Zhao Wenwei, who previously had the leisure to secretly size up the white-clothed girl, felt uneasy. She wanted nothing more than to cheer for the immortal Sir Qi. She desperately hoped that Sir Qi would pull out the entire saber in one spurt of energy and extinguish the arrogance of the young king of Beiliang. However, to be honest, after seeing this notorious Northwest vassal king with her own eyes, putting aside his provocative words, he was no different from those outstanding scholars Zhao Wenwei had seen when she was studying in the diligent department of the Imperial Palace and Zhao Jiaoing Imperial College. He had a good background, a good appearance, and a good temper. He was the kind of person who could be hated even if she didn't like him. When Qi Jiajie finally raised his right hand, he put 2 fingers together and hovered in the air an inch above the saber. Qi Jiajie's momentum suddenly changed. If before he was like the 5 great mountains towering over the central plains, now he was like the Guangling River surging eastward into the sea. Chapter 1539. Chai Qing-shan said softly to the 2 children, "Look carefully at how others comprehend the sword while watching the tide." When Qi Jiajie was 18, 27, and 36 years old, he had watched the Guangling tide 3 times. Finally, he comprehended the method of operating the qi activity of the sudden inspiration. Looking at the experts of the Jianghu today, Qi Jiajie is far inferior to the 14 Wu judges in terms of qi circulation. He's also not in the front of the 10 people on the Great Snow Plateau. However, in terms of qi circulation, not to mention master, even Xianyuan Qingfeng might not be able to compare. Chai Ching Shan couldn't help but snort coldly. You two have been to the Guangling River twice and have seen a lot of excitement. You two haven't stopped talking. What did you comprehend in the end? Song Tingla turned his back to his master and made a face. The girl said in a deep voice, Master, I'll definitely watch the tide carefully next time. Chai Ching Shan was stunned and then smiled bitterly. Song Tingla muttered, Pretend, keep pretending. Shan Yi's face instantly turned red. She reached behind her and couldn't help but pull out the new sword, Fuji, that she forged. Every disciple of the sword pool had to forge a new sword if they wanted to leave the sect and travel the Jianghu. Therefore, other than the countless genius swordsmen in the Donghua sword pool, there were also countless talented swordsmithing masters who left their names in history. As for Shan Yi, this disciple that Chai Ching Shan had taken a liking to, whether it was learning swordsmanship or forging swords, she had an amazing talent. If a martial artist wanted to have a strong physique, they had to pay attention to step by step. Shan Yi was only a 4th grade expert, but her unique understanding of swordsmanship was already at the 2nd grade master realm in Chai Qingshan's opinion. Song Tingla hurriedly begged for mercy, Junior sister, can you not fight here? There are so many outsiders here. How can I gain an undefeated record in the Jianghu in the future? Shan Yi was too lazy to pay attention to this guy who kept saying that he wanted to gain an undefeated record in the Jianghu. He could learn from anyone, but he just had to learn from that short-lived one bushing in the capital. He said that he didn't want to win against many masters in his life, but he wanted to be undefeated. This was the new sword that he had to bring with him when he left the sect. Otherwise, Song Tingla would be carrying a wooden sword in the sword pool, acting so sloppy. Qi Jiajia's long saber was almost completely unsheathed, leaving only the tip of the sword unsheathed. Zhao Wenwei said softly, Okay. Then, he realized that Shan Yi was glaring at him, and the confused youth's momentum quickly fell to the bottom. At this critical moment, Su Fengnian actually walked to the street and looked up at Wudong Mountain. On the mountain, in front of the thatched cottage near the elephant cleansing pond, stood a young Daoist dressed in an ordinary Daoist robe from Mount Longhu. Beside him was a man who was squatting on the ground and reading an ancient book with narrowed eyes. The latter said softly, Focus, this isn't the action of a gentleman. The young Daoist said calmly, Mister, although it goes against my conscience, my surname is Zhao after all. I'm a Daoist from the Celestial Master Residence. Uncle has been preaching in Great Peace City for many years, and now he's still in a precarious situation in the capital. In his letter, Uncle mocked himself that he couldn't even be Prime Minister Qingzi. Moreover, Mr. also knows that if Wu Lingxiu is allowed to gain power, not only will it be a misfortune for Buddhism, but the orthodox Taoism will also be shaken. The scholarly man who seemed to have bad eyesight was almost glued to the page of the book. He sighed and said, choosing the lesser of two evils. He wanted to say something but stopped. He shook his head and smiled helplessly. I, by you, won't nag about those great principles. Everyone says one is one. We scholars know a lot and like to say 1, 2, 3, 4. If you don't stop us, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 will also come. Sometimes, if I ask myself, it's really annoying. Alright, do your work. Don't worry about me. This book is not bad. I've searched for many years but couldn't find it. I'll take this chance to read it first. Zhao Ningxin hesitated. Although this time, at most, will make him lose the destiny that was about to form in the western regions. But mister, you still shouldn't have come to Wudong Mountain. Once he's angry, it's fine if I die, but mister, you shouldn't have died in this Bailiang. Mister should have gone further than Sun Ping in the past. Bai Yu dabbed in his saliva and gently turned a page. He said, if the heart is too big, the appetite will inevitably be too big. It's harmful to the body. Zhao Ningxin sighed. He walked forward a few steps, closed his eyes, and formed a seal with his fingers. In the celestial master residence of Longhu Mountain, the highest bud of the purple gold lotus in the lotus pond suddenly bloomed and then withered. On the large ship on the first floor of the Qingzhou Navy, there was a scholar sitting cross-legged. There was a bowl of water in front of him. He pinched a clean white stone between his fingers and said with a smile, "Since the matter has come to this, and the situation has changed, don't blame me, Xie Guining, for adding insult to injury." The stone smashed into the water in the bowl. At the same time, a streak of white light flashed from the southeast to the northwest. After looking at the north, Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and began to turn sideways to look at the east. Without the support of the Qi Jiajia's long spear slid back into its sheath. Qi Jiajia took off the long spear and casually threw it on the street. Yin Changing and the others were confused. Shan Yi and Song Tinglu were also confused. Chai Qingshan, who had been watching the show, also took a step forward. Su Fengnian looked into the distance and said with a smile, "The Donghua sword pool has poured in all its efforts to forge a new sword. Qi Jiajia is the sword master. The few remaining Qi refinement warriors of Liang have gathered together with Zhao Ningxian of Longhu Mountain and Chai Qingshan's help. The sword that you invited from thousands of miles away is much more extravagant than the sword that I used to kill Han Xingxian." Qi Jiajia said softly, "I'm ashamed." Chai Qingshan was silent. Su Fengnian, who still had the Green Water Pavilion sword training record under his arm, did not show any sign of anger. "Mount Wudong is not far," he said, "burning incense and making a wish is quite effective." "You'd better pray that I won't be able to block your sword," he said. The girl from the Donghua sword pool said timidly, "Su Fengnian, doesn't the Jianghu say that you are the reincarnation of Zhenwu Great Emperor? What's the use of making wishes?" Su Fengnian could not help but say, "That's true." Su Fengnian looked at her and the young man who did look like Song Nianqing. The latter quickly grasped the sword hilt with both hands. He knew that the king of Beiliang was very good at borrowing swords without asking for permission. And he would often borrow hundreds or thousands of swords. On the other hand, the girl, who had not grown up yet, blinked at Su Fengnian, indicating that the sword on her back was not bad. If he wanted it, he could take it. There was no need to borrow it. Su Fengnian exhaled softly. He looked to the east and said to himself, "There's no need to borrow it. I have my own swords now." Su Fengnian rose from the ground and stepped into the air. In the sky, the man was surrounded by swords like locusts. "I have a sword. 2,400 swords. 6,000 miles long." Chapter 1540. The world-renowned Mr. White Lotus was still reading the book. If there were other people around, they would think that this scholar had buried his head in the book. It was a funny scene. Back then, during the battle at the Spring God Lake, Zhao Ningxian invited the ancestors of Mount Longhu, but his golden body was still broken. However, after Zhao Ningxian's realm fell, he resolutely decided to go into a life and death seclusion to cultivate the Tao arts of the Jade Emperor Pavilion, which was as famous as the Wudong Great Yellow Court. Finally, he broke through and stood up again to condense his fate. The purple golden lotus in the Dragon Lake bore a natal bud. In the future, as long as Zhao Ningxian carefully nurtured it, he might be able to ascend like his grandfather Zhao Shi and his father Zhao Donxia. He might even have a higher rank and complete the magnificent feat of ascending on the dragon. Therefore, this time, Zhao Ningxian destroyed his own purple gold lotus and guided the 10,000-mile sword to break Su Fengnian's fate. He was destroying both jade and common stone. Otherwise, with Qi Jiajia's sword strength, he wouldn't be able to fly from Donghua Sword Lake to Wudong Mountain in the northwest. Zhao Ningxian's body swayed and fell to the ground. He murmured, along the way, "I kept telling myself that it was for the sake of the Central Plains orthodoxy, for the people of Liang, and at least for the 1,000-year inheritance of the Celestial Master's mansion in Dragon Tiger Mountain." But in the end, it was just for my own selfish reasons. I wanted to solve the inner demon of my defeat at Spring God Lake. Bai Yu walked to the young Taoist with a book in his hand and said softly, "Ordinary people bully others, immortal people bully heaven and earth. It's not hard, but it's easy to deceive yourself. It's always easy to say it's easy, but it's hard to say it's hard." He bent down and put his hand on the young Taoist's shoulder. He said softly, "Ningxin, don't blame yourself. Since you've passed this hurdle, you should cherish it more. As for me, I won't be able to pass this in my life. I don't want to be like Xianyuan Jingqing, who can't get out of Mount Hui. In the future, you and I will be senior brothers. You can cultivate in peace on the mountain, and I can be Zhang Julu at the foot of the mountain, or Sun Ping, who died before achieving victory. It doesn't matter anymore." The man from the Taoist master mansion, who was personally bestowed the title of Mr. White Lotus by the late Emperor of Liang, squints his eyes and looks into the distance. "My eyes are not good. Unfortunately, I can't see how magnificent that sword is." Zhao Ningxin looked into the distance and said bitterly, "Then I'll take a look for you." At the Green Mule Ferry at the west end of Bailu Lake, under the tight escort of the Qingzhou Navy, 100,000 Nanjiang elite troops began to methodically cross the river. This was undoubtedly a huge project, but the Qingzhou Navy that was temporarily under the command of the King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, was cautious and conscientious. They won the approval of the Qingzhou Navy, including the general of Nanjiang, Wu Zhongshuan, and changed their bad impression of the Qingzhou Navy that was said to be an embroidered pillow. However, the young vassal king who assisted the southern border army in crossing the river did not have much interaction with that great General Wu. They had only met at the banquet for the southern border generals. However, that night, as long as there were prostitutes in Xiangfan City and even the entire Qing province, almost all of them were invited to the Qing province Navy's ship. The king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, also had the elegant title of Rouge Prince in the literary circle of Qingzhou. On the ship that had quietly withdrawn all of the Qing province Navy soldiers, a man and a woman stood at the door to the cabin. They looked at the middle-aged scholar who had been sitting cross-legged for a long time. Earlier, they had watched him inexplicably place down a white bowl and then toss in a stone. The young man was wearing a brocade robe and a jade belt. He was elegant and elegant. The graceful and moving woman also took off her hat after boarding the ship, revealing a face that could make the old Qingzhou faction's bigwigs dumbfounded. The woman and the concubine Pei Nanwei who accompanied the old king to the underworld were 80% similar in appearance and 70% in spirit. The woman frowned and said, "Prince, that light just now was sword qi." The king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, said helplessly, "You're asking me with my mediocre skills." She didn't pretend to be a mature woman or a shy girl. She didn't even want to smile. She just slightly raised the corner of her mouth. No matter how many times Zhao Sun saw this kind of cold expression, he still felt a rush of excitement. The rising young vassal king of the Liang dynasty held her hand without saying a word. A man in a white robe walked out of the cabin and passed by the two people. He walked to the side of the gray-haired scholar and glanced down. He saw that in the white bowl, there was a thin white line cutting through the water. The middle-aged scholar waved his hand and the bowl disappeared. He slowly got up and walked to the railing with the man in the white robe. He looked around and said with emotion, 800 miles of Spring God Lake, in addition to the Guangling River, there are 4 rivers flowing into it. What a magnificent and boundless place. Even the villagers who have lived by the lake all their lives wouldn't think that the Spring God Lake is actually withering day by day like an old man past his prime. But the white reed lake under our feet is like the scene of the young man gradually turning into the prime of his life. It will become more and more vast and eventually become the biggest lake in the world. Huang Longsher once said that the fate of the world is predetermined, but it doesn't stop moving. The land is the master and the water is the guest. If you don't keep it, you can't get it. The handsome man in the simple white robe didn't comment. The Confucian scholar smiled and said, for the sake of the fate of Liang and northern Liang, Qi Jiajie had no choice but to give up his lifelong ambition. He abandoned Changwu and went to the sword pool of Donghua to seek a sword. After Qi Lianhua created havoc in the imperial astronomer of Great Peace City, Liang had no choice but to gather all the remaining Qi cultivators of the northern supporting dragon sect at the sword pool. They used their lives as the price to inject their essence, blood and spirit into the sword furnace. Such a big movement was just an extravagant hope to shatter that person's newly obtained fate. Thinking about it, the Zhao family of Liang was indeed aggrieved. Thousands of scholars died and the Jianghu people flooded in. Then there was the Lotus Peak debate. Even the two famous Taoists of Huainan and Jiangnan flocked there. This was the attitude of the whole world. Seeing that Beiliang didn't follow the rules, the person sitting on the dragon throne in Great Peace City couldn't come up with a good solution. To be honest, if I didn't add fuel to the fire, Qi Jiajie and the others wouldn't have succeeded. Chapter 1541. Xia Guining, who ranked first on the celestial map, and Chen Jibao, who left earlier than the 10,000 Shu soldiers who were summoned to quell the rebellion. Xia Guining did not turn to look at the king of Jing'an, who had succeeded in inheriting the title like Su Fingnian. He laughed softly and said, without Lu Su's help, he is doing well. Xia Guining joked, Your Highness, you should give him some face. He admires you a lot. Furthermore, we still have to rely on this emperor of 10 years in the future. Without him, things will be much more troublesome. Chen Jibao looked towards the northwest. The bright white rainbow was becoming more and more majestic. Even the extraordinary king of Shu narrowed his eyes subconsciously. Before Xia Guining noticed the clues and threw the stone into the bowl, in a large reed marsh at the east end of Bailu Lake, a small boat stood still and moved with the waves. On the bow of the boat, there was a bright red robe that spun quickly like a blooming peony. The red robe suddenly stopped. The joyful face looked towards the sky. Just as she was about to fly into the sky, the woman lying on the boat with her eyes closed said, Don't worry about men's business. In the capital of West Chu, Chao Chongqing, who had rushed back to the imperial court from Bailu Lake to take charge of the military and political affairs, came to the wide white jade square outside the hall. His gaze followed the sword light from east to west. He sighed and said, Lord Yenxing, this sword should have been waiting for me outside Taiwan City, right? Chao Chongqing said loudly, Su Fingnian. Please help Li Chungang, Wang Xianji, Jian Zhouhuang, and all the people of Jianghu who have died in Jianghu. Teach the people in the imperial court what Jianghu is. The three Taoists walked along Guangling River to the east. When they could see the outline of Xiangfan City, the young Taoist in Wudang robe stopped. The little Taoist whose entire body was flowing with spiritual qi asked curiously, Master, why aren't you moving? The man with a sword on his back, who was wearing a Taoist robe from Longhu Mountain but mingling with the Wudang Taoists, frowned and said, This sword is coming from Donghua Sword Pool to Wudang Mountain. Li Yufu, the current leader of Wudang's sect, who accompanied the carp to transform into a flood dragon in the river and into a dragon in the sea, nodded gently. He did not say anything, but there was a rare anger between his brows. Qi Xianxia, the Taoist priest of Mount Longhu, who came to look for the master and disciple of Wudang, praised, This sword has no scabbard, the world is the sword's clothes. If I can face this sword head-on in this life, I will die without regrets. The little Taoist, Yu Fu, said softly, Life and death, how important is that? Let's not die so easily. Qi Xianxia was speechless. She turned her head and stared at the little Taoist. She smiled knowingly and said, You look like someone. When he was timid, he was even worse than a woman. When you're brave. Qi Xianxia didn't say that. When he was bold, even the immortals in the heavens were afraid. The donkey-riding middle-aged man, who had already passed Jiang'e and entered Shishu Dao, suddenly said angrily, Li Yang, oh Li Yang, how can you play with this sword like this? Aren't you forcing me, Dong Tai, to go to Belyang's border? The young man who was pulling the box on the back of the donkey said with a sad face, Master, can we not let our emotions affect our decisions? It wasn't easy for us to come to Shishu Dao from there. My calves and stomach have become thinner. In the end, we didn't see any scenery and we have to go beyond Belyang's Great Wall. The peach blossom sword god, who had never meddled in Li Yang's court, rubbed his chin and said, Li Yang has gone too far in this matter. It's not as simple as stabbing someone in the back, it's going to someone else's house and digging up the foundation of their house in front of them. Using the words we heard from someone 2 days ago, if the uncle can bear it, the aunt. The young man quickly cut him off and said, the aunt can also bear it. Dong Tai bent down and rubbed the back of his old companion, the donkey. After thinking for a while, he said, there's no rush. Master will first take you to see the scenery of Shishu. I have a feeling that in the future, no place in the world will be safe. Only this place will be more peaceful. If you can find a wife here, that would be for the best. When that time comes, Master will have nothing to worry about and can leave Shishu Dao alone. The young man laughed foolishly and said, that's ridiculous. Dong Tai rolled his eyes and said, you're just secretly happy. The young man suddenly said angrily, although I don't know what happened, if I were the king of Belyang, a great grandmaster, I would have already killed my way to Great Peace City and beat up that Emperor Li Yang. Dong Tai sighed and said, so Su Fingnian is the king of Belyang, and you can only be my, Dong Tai's, useless disciple. The young man said angrily, I'm really going to find a wife in Shishu Dao. When the time comes, I won't care about you anymore. Dong Tai turned his head and looked to the north. Then hurry up. At the border between Belyang's Lu Zhou and Beimang's Gusai Zhou, Toba Bodhisattva, who was discussing matters with a group of generals including Lu Gui, suddenly strode out of his tent. This king of the northern courtyard had a complicated expression. If he had known this would happen, would Su Fingnian have stayed at Hudi's city and fought with him again? If he died like this, the history books would say that he was a northwest vassal king who died in battle at the border. He would not die for no reason and cause the door to the central plains to open. At the imperial astronomer of Great Peace City, without those chi cultivators, the imperial astronomer of today was too quiet. A young man wearing a yellow dragon robe and a young man wearing the uniform of the imperial astronomer walked side by side. The emperor tried his best to speak calmly and asked, Little bookshelf, how confident are you? Under the sunlight, the young man raised his hand to cover his forehead and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, I don't know about other things, but someone is unforgivable. The young emperor also smiled. I'm clearly a formidable person, but my son wants to be a hero. How funny. The young man suddenly became worried. Brother Emperor, are you not afraid that he will completely side with Beimang? The emperor asked. His father, Su Shao, has only done 2 things in his life. He used 20 years to conquer the Central Plains and another 20 years to resist Beimang. Do you think he dares to side with Beimang? Does he dare to let his father's efforts go down the drain? The young man said, Oh. The emperor was extremely happy. He smiled and said, Right, the Su Fingnian who doesn't want to be a loyal official but a filial son. Chapter 1542. In the summer town, Mr. Qi, who was as immovable as a mountain, stared at Chai Ching-shan and said angrily, Why didn't you stop Su Fingnian from leaving? Don't you know that the later Su Fingnian meets the sword, the more likely we are to succeed? Qi Jiajie took a step forward and stretched out his hand. The long banners on the street rose into the air. He glanced at the girl with a single surname beside Chai Ching-shan who was holding the book like it was a treasure and said angrily, You just casually threw out a crude copy of the Greenwater Pavilion Sword Practice Manual. Do you, Chai Ching-shan, still want the Donghua sword pool to suppress the Wu family sword tomb? Have you forgotten why your junior brother Song Nianqing died? Chai Ching-shan rubbed his disciple Shani's head and said with a smile, "Do you think I can stop Su Fingnian if he wants to leave?" Chai Ching-shan shook his head and said, "If I join hands with you, the #1 swordsman in the north, and sacrifice our lives, we can delay Su Fingnian for a long time. In the end, the sword will reach Yuzhou, or even the foot of Wudong Mountain. But I don't think this will affect the outcome of the battle. The Dongyue Sword Pool and the Wu Sword Mound have been fighting for the title of the Sword Pool for hundreds of years, from the Dafeng dynasty to the current Liang dynasty. The disciples of the Dongyue Sword Pool have different levels of swordsmanship and different levels of swordsmanship. Have you ever heard of anyone who failed to honor the swords they forged?" Chai Ching-shan sneered and said, "First, junior brother Song Nianqing died for the imperial court. Now, the sword pool forged a sword for you, Qi Jiajie. So I didn't even bring my sword on this trip. Someone needs to beg for food at the foot of the emperor, but I, Chai Ching-shan, don't." "What? Not convinced? Come and hit me. Anyway, it's not the first time I don't like you and Master Lu Hao." Qi Jiajie was so angry that he lost his composure. Even the long spear trembled in the air. Even Song Tinglu and Shan Yi, the two disciples of the sword pool, had their horizons broadened. Master was usually a very serious old man. Why had he changed today? But the boy and girl liked it. This was the good master in their hearts. The girl in white with a sword on her back felt even more satisfied. Su Fingnian had thrown her the green water pavilion before he left. In her opinion, her master should have met such a person and drank 300 cups of wine together. Therefore, she made a face and shook her head to add fuel to the fire. "What do you think? If you're not convinced, come and hit me. Come and hit me." Song Tinglu turned his head and bared his teeth. Look, as long as that person was not around, his junior sister would reveal her foxtail. But he liked it from the bottom of his heart. The sword pool disciple was angry. The boy, the boy, the boy. The sword pool youth shouted, "Master, he, Jiajie, the boy. The boy, he was. The sword. The sword, was shouted A's, he, the sword boy was to stare, S's, S-A, he. The boy was slapped on the head by his sister. Song Tinglu, you're his mother. Zhao Wenwei, whose face became thinner after meeting the girl, only dared to say in his heart, "Miss, my name is Zhao Wenwei. I'm a scholar who aspires to be the most famous scholar in history." Qi Jiajie's eyes were fierce. Chai Ching-shan had let go. He didn't pretend to be an elder in front of his disciple. He tilted his head and picked his ears. "Qi Jiajie, if I remember correctly, you, the one flying the kite, still have to pay attention to the flying sword thousands of miles away. Don't let it go to waste. If you really want to fight with your life on the line, then wait until this matter is over. When the time comes, regardless of whether it is your swordsmanship or your state of mind, you will have benefited greatly after this trip. You will have a chance to reach the realm of Deng Tai's sea visit to the Immortals. When the time comes, you and I will definitely die." Qi Jiajie suddenly closed his eyes and sensed the thread-like will of the sword. After he opened his eyes, he regained the otherworldly demeanor of Mr. Qi of Grand Peace City. He smiled and said, "Chai Ching-shan, you don't have to talk about the demeanor of a swordsman or the honor of Jianghu. You just don't think that the sword can achieve anything. Let me tell you a piece of news. Someone has secretly added a great aura to the sword that is enough to trigger the anomalies of the world." Chai Ching-shan narrowed his eyes. "Oh. Let's wait and see." Qi Jiajie smiled and waved his hand. The long tortoise and sword were nailed into the pillar of the inn. Han Xingxian was waiting for him in Shenwu City. Yang Taisui was waiting for him outside the Iron Gate. Huang Qing and the Bronze Man Grandmaster were waiting for him in Liuzhou. Diwu Raccoon went to Mount Bubang to find him. Wang Xianji went to Beiliang to find him. Tuoba Bodhisattva was looking for him in the western regions. This time, it was nothing more than a sword looking for Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian broke through the air on the spot. He summoned 2,400 sword wills of 1 qi and took the initiative to meet the sword. Su Fengnian stepped on a sword of qi. He floated in the wind. With the sword under his feet, he walked with the wind. Qi Jiajie was only a medicinal primer carefully prepared by the Liang imperial court. It was not difficult for Su Fengnian to kill him, whether or not Chai Qingshan of the Donghua sword pool was there to stop him. Why did Qi Jiajie happen to arrive at Fuxia town almost at the same time as Wang Yuanran and the others? Otherwise, with the great reputation of Mr. Qi in the capital and the background of Yin Changying and the others in the imperial court, how could there not be a few rooms on Mount Wudong for them to stay and rest? Qi Jiajie wanted to use the abundant sword aura that leaked out of the town of escape heat to force Su Fengnian to come down from the mountain and reveal himself. Then he would pretend to unsheath his long sword and have an ulterior motive in this competition. He wanted to bite Su Fengnian's unique qi to death, so that he could find a target for the 10,000 li coming from the east sword. Of course, Su Fengnian was not unfamiliar with this bold move. In fact, to be precise, he was the ancestor of this trick. Back then, when there was a great disparity in strength, he still insisted on killing the cat Han Xingxian. For this purpose, he planned carefully. First, he lent the sword to Sui Xiegu in Wuwu City. Then, he returned the sword to the outside of Shenwu City. Only then, he was lucky enough to kill the cat man who was known as the first person on earth below the immortals. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "An eye for an eye. It's not that you don't want to take revenge, it's just that it's not time yet." He stepped on the tip of his foot slightly and the tip of his sword slightly tilted. Then, the whole forest of swords soared into the sky and rushed into the thick clouds. When Su Fengnian broke through the clouds together with the swords, it was like a school of fish jumping out of the water. Above the sea of clouds, the rays of the sun shone brightly. The sunlight was so unscrupulous that it seemed to have draped the clouds with a graceful and magnificent golden coat. Heaven and earth were quiet and the atmosphere was peaceful. Only the swords were agile and wanton, leisurely wandering. The duck in the spring river knows when the water is warm, and the cicada is aware before the golden wind rises. The finger mystery state had the ability to predict the future. Therefore, when fighting against the enemy, they always had the advantage. The celestial state, the third realm of the first rank, got its name because of the resonance between man and heaven. Entering this realm was no different from the Qi cultivators who were good at prying into the world's atmosphere, or even better. They had a keen intuition about the direction of the general trend, especially when it involved themselves. The highest land immortal among the first-rank 4 realms was known to travel the East Sea in the morning and arrive at the Great Desert in the evening. His wanton and unfettered behavior was worthy of the 4 words, wonderful beyond words. In today's world, who would dare to say that the good-for-nothing crown prince of the past was not a true immortal? The Wudong peaks behind Su Fengnian gradually faded away. He could clearly sense that the distant sword had just flown from Gongnam-do to Huainan Dao. A battle of life and death was destined to take place above the 9 heavens. But after all, there was still Huainan Dao between them, so Su Fengnian was still not in a hurry. Aside from the 2,400 swords, Su Fengnian stood on the flying sword with his hands behind his back like an immortal on stilts. He stared at the vast sea of clouds and sighed. He never thought that he would have such a day. It had always been Su Fengnian's childhood dream to be a hero who could walk on snow without leaving a trace and leap over roofs and vault over walls. In any case, his Su family already had the Su family's saber that could make all heroes in the world bow their heads. Then he would carry his saber and roam Jianghu in Jianghu, eradicating evil, helping those in distress and helping those in distress, killing bandits to save women and children, killing rapists to save beautiful girls. On one hand, he was chivalrous and righteous, and on the other hand, he was acquainted with the heroes of Jianghu whose names shook the world, earning himself a nickname similar to Divine Saber Su Fengnian. At that time, the Jianghu of the Central Plains was quite popular to use the title Gongzi as a suffix. When he was young, His Royal Highness discussed with his eldest sister for a long time and very carefully listed out a large number of Gongzi. For example, if he wore a white gown, he would use the title Jade Tree Gongzi. If he wore a green gown, he would be called the Azure Dragon Gongzi. He had long promised his younger brother Huang Man that he would help him snatch the world's most beautiful woman as his wife. It was a pity that second sister who only liked to read history and military books scoffed at this. But when the youth vowed that he would find a good wife, just like how Su Xiao had found his mother in the Jianghu, second sister finally smiled. Second sister finally smiled. For the first time, she didn't mock her. His Royal Highness, who was lawless in Bailiang, only heard later that there might be immortals in the world who could fly through the clouds like birds. One time, when he was bored, he went to bully a certain young girl who held a Shanglyph dagger in her sleep. He purposefully scared her, telling her that his body was so strange that even he was afraid of it, that he was a martial genius that only appeared once in 100 years. If he was willing to practice martial arts and the sword, he would be able to fly on his sword and defecate above Great Peace City in 15 minutes. With a thought, the swords moved. The dense swords around Su Fengnian spread out slightly, but the flying sword under his feet would be in front of a flying sword every 100 feet, and the swords would collide with each other. Su Fengnian smiled as he stepped out and stepped on the sword 10 zhang away. He repeated this, one sword for another, and started to run. Chapter 1543. A long time ago, when they had just settled down in Mount Qingliang, the eldest sister had not yet married off to the distant Jiangnan, the second sister had not yet had a wheelchair as a companion, and the younger brother had not yet been enlightened. The 4 innocent and happy children would randomly find an empty space, set up a grid, and jump around for an entire afternoon without tiring. When it was time to eat, the man who did not wear armor and thus only looked like a rich man would always call for the children under his wife's orders. His legs were slightly lame, and the man had a temperament of wanting to save face in front of his children. As a result, he would only laugh happily and watch them play. If it were not for his wife personally coming to catch them, the man would continue to watch, telling them to slow down and not fall. No one would ever know why. Ever since he left Liaodong in Jinzhou, a man who had seen the magnificent scenery of northern Han, later Sui, western Chu, western Shu, and so many other countries, would, in the end, patiently watch his 4 children perform the same routine over and over again. Yet, after his wife urged him to leave, he would feel reluctant to part. It was as if he hoped that his 4 children would always be this carefree, that they would not grow up, that the woman would not marry out of the family, and that the son would not take on any burdens. Perhaps no one would ever know that there was a young man, who was not a sword immortal of the land, who jumped around on a flying sword above the sea of clouds just because he thought of the happy times of his childhood. Su Fengnian finally stopped and lay down on his back. Beneath him, 100 flying swords instantly gathered and connected. Su Fengnian lay on a large bed of flying swords. He narrowed his eyes and gazed at the sky, the brilliant sunlight falling on his body. His golden body was resplendent. Not long ago, on an official road in Yuzhou near escaped summer town, the exhausted young woman could no longer endure the scorching sun. She told her companion that she wanted to rest for a while. Afterwards, she leaned against the trunk of a willow tree by the side of the road and took a nap. A bald little monk in a tattered kasaya squatted by the young woman's side. After she fell asleep, he gently waved his sleeve, fanning a gentle breeze. However, the little monk was a little worried. He noticed that she seemed to be having nightmares again. He frowned. It wasn't just this afternoon nap. In fact, ever since the 2 of them entered Bailiang's territory, she often had nightmares like this. She would wake up in the middle of the night from time to time. No matter how tired she was, she would refuse to close her eyes and sleep. I didn't take good care of Thingy. Thingy has suffered a lot. She hasn't bought any rouge for more than half a year. She doesn't even look at the shops. Thingy even deliberately said that she doesn't like rouge anymore. Master, while Thingy still likes rouge, please teach me. This time, I will study diligently and become a Buddha as soon as possible. The small monk suddenly heard a very familiar voice. This stupid disciple of yours. The little monk hurriedly raised his head with a face full of pleasant surprise. Then, he stretched out his finger and made a shushing sound, indicating that the newcomer should not disturb her. The little monk did not even bother to wipe away the tears on his face. The white-robed monk who had rushed over from Mount Wudong sighed in his heart. His daughter was right. She was a stupid girl. Li Xiaoxin slowly sat down on the ground. Abbot, Abbot. The area within a radius of 10 feet immediately became cool. The white-robed monk closed his eyes and gently stretched out his hand to touch the space between his daughter's eyebrows. 3 years of Xiangfu. It was the end of autumn. The Beimang army had gathered again. 400,000 elites were continuously pressing on Huayang Pass. A young monk broke through the clouds and landed outside the city like an immortal. He sat cross-legged. The young monk suddenly raised his head and said in a deep voice, "The world is so big. Please allow me to erect a benevolent monument in front of Beimang City." He closed his eyes and put his palms together. In fact, he did not say it out loud. No matter how big the world was, it was only the east, west, north, and south. The cavalry did not charge. Instead, they slowly held the line and then released thousands of arrows. The arrows were densely packed like a swarm of locusts. The entire sky was like a fragile piece of silk that was instantly torn apart by sharp weapons. The young monk lowered his head and chanted sutras, forming a golden body. As waves of arrows rained down, the monk's golden light began to waver and weaken. The arrow rain was endless. Scarlet blood began to gradually soak the Kasaya. The lips of the young monk who was covered in blood trembled. He lowered his head and murmured, "Master, you have said that deep in love, do you regret it?" "I don't understand the principles you said, but it doesn't matter. If I go west, I'll go. If I become a Buddha, I'll become a Buddha." For some reason, his scarlet body turned into a golden color in an instant. The monk, whose vision was blurred, turned his head with difficulty and looked at the city wall. His face was full of tears, but he grinned. He raised his hand and patted his ear, as if he was telling someone something. He turned his head and bent down slightly. He reached out and pushed the sand in front of his feet. It seemed that he was lifting something up for setting down something. He bent 2 fingers and gently knocked. Between heaven and earth. Suddenly, there was a clear and melodious sound of a wooden fish. Under the shade of the willow, the girl suddenly cried. After opening her eyes, she looked around blankly. When she saw that the stupid Nanbei was still there and that white robe, she did not know if she was still dreaming. She cried even harder. The little monk, who did not know what to do, pulled his master's sleeve and said in a hoarse voice, "Master, what's wrong with her?" The white-robed monk held his daughter in his arms and comforted her softly. Okay, silly girl, don't be afraid. Father and the stupid Nanbei are here." The white-robed monk reached out and wiped his daughter's forehead. She fell into a deep sleep. This time, she had no dreams and slept very soundly. Li Xiaoxin let his daughter continue to sit against the willow tree. After helping to wipe the tears on her cheeks, he touched his big bald head and turned to the little bald head beside him and said, "Nanbei, when she wakes up, take her to the Xiang Palace on Mount Wudong. Your master's wife is waiting for you there. She complains that the vegetarian dishes in the Taoist temple on the mountain have no oil and are not delicious. She misses your cooking very much. Remember to buy more chicken, duck, and fish at the small town at the foot of the mountain. When I come back, let's have a good meal together tonight. The little monk Nanbei said awkwardly, I don't have money. Master, do you? The white-robed monk glared and said in a low voice, when you reach Bailiang, will the Sugai not provide food? At worst, you can go to that place called Escape Summer Town and tell them your names. Just say that you are my daughter and disciple. The little monk asked, what if it doesn't work? The white-robed monk said unhappily, then when you go up the mountain, go to the Sugai's thatched cottage and secretly pick a few cucumbers. The small monk rubbed his bald head and let out a sigh. The white-robed monk slowly got up and said, do as you see fit. I have to go and send that kid off. The two dynasties of Liang and Beimang have destroyed Buddhism. Only Bailiang worships Buddhism. If this is intolerable, then I have no Zen. I have to recite Zen properly. The little monk said nervously, Master, when you meet Su Fengnian, you must be polite. He is a good person. Oh right, Master, you didn't bring the sharpened kitchen knife when you went down the mountain this time, right? If you did, I will need it to cook at night. Master, you don't have to bring it. The white-robed monk waved his sleeves and jumped up. After reaching a height of several hundred feet, he walked towards the sky step by step. One step, one lotus. Li Shaoxin said to himself, Disciple, you can forget about becoming a Buddha. I'm good at this. On this day, the sky above Bailiang was like a lotus pond suspended in the sky. After that, there were even Buddhas sitting on lotuses. In the sky nearly 100 miles away from the border of Hizhou, the white-robed monk caught up with the young lord who was flying east on his sword. Su Fengnian stopped the spectacular sword formation and asked, Master, is there anything I can help you with? The two were already above the sea of clouds, but the white-robed monk still pointed to a higher place. You should know, right? Su Fengnian smiled and said, Of course. In addition to Qi Jiajia's sword and Xie Guaning's interference, there will be some people who will not tolerate me. But don't worry, Master, it is all within my expectations. When there are too many lice, there is no need to be afraid of being bitten. When there are too many debts, there is no need to worry. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the vast and unfathomable space and sneered, if it was before the battle with Wang Qing, I would still be a little afraid. But now, it's nothing. The white-robed monk looked at the Northwest Lord who opened the door of Bailiang to accept all the monks in the world, and said in a deep voice, I am not helping you, Su Fengnian. Of course, I can't help you much. But the pure land of Bailiang is what my master, martial uncle, and that useless monk of Mount Lantua want to see. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment and finally said bluntly, Master, you should know that I am guarding the northwest and resisting Beimang's million-strong army out of selfishness. If I wasn't Su Zhao's son, if it wasn't for the fact that my northern Liang cavalry had taken root here for 20 years, their blood, sweat, and tears were all here, then I, Su Fengnian, might have at most single-handedly killed several dozen northern Mang generals and tried to kill Tuoba Bodhisattva. I definitely wouldn't have defended the border to the death in Liang province. As for accepting all the monks in the world, isn't it like being angry with Liang? The white-robed monk waved his hand impatiently. I don't care what you think. I only care about what you do and what you do. Su Fengnian laughed it off. The white-robed monk snorted and said, This sword is not simple. Don't die. My daughter and disciple have some debts with Escape Summer Town. They are waiting for you, Su Fengnian, to return them. Su Fengnian smiled and said, No problem. Su Fengnian turned around and continued to fly on his sword, heading straight for the border between Bailiang and Huainan. The white-robed monk turned to face the west, but when he turned his head to look at the slightly lonely slender figure, he somewhat resembled himself when he went down the mountain from the two Zen temples and traveled thousands of miles to the west alone. The white-robed monk smiled. Not long ago on Mount Wudong, his wife said that it would be great if they had 2 daughters. At that time, he thought it was ridiculous, but now it seemed that it was not so ridiculous. The white-robed monk put his palms together and softly chanted the name of Buddha. Chapter 1544. Around the white-robed monk, lotuses as large as mountains bloomed one after another. The lotuses bathed in the dazzling sunlight rose above the sea of clouds. Thousands of lotuses rose in Bailiang. The white-robed monk put his palms together and lowered his head, saying softly, "When my heart is clear, when can I not see Tathagata? Where my heart is clear, where is not the Western paradise?" The white-robed monk slowly raised his head and said loudly, "Lotuses fall in the Buddhist kingdom." On top of the lotuses, there were many Buddhas sitting on them. The Buddha's light shone down on the earth and covered the entire land of Bailiang. Wudong's peaks were high and cold to the north. In the area northwest of Liang, only the Dansha Peak, Jiazi Peak, Goddess Peak, and the others, which originated from Hezhou, were adjacent to the other 6 peaks. It could be said that Wudong did not monopolize the beauty. When Su Fengnian drove the group of swords to the border of Yuzhou province, unlike the tranquil sea of clouds at the border of Yuzhou province, the scene in front of him was surging like a huge tide. The mountains of Hezhou province had sunk into the bottom of the sea of clouds. Only the most precipitous 6 peaks rose above the sea of clouds. However, only the sharp corners of the 6 peaks could be seen. The peaks of the 6 peaks were like piled-up stones in the river, which stood still despite the waves. Su Fengnian looked at the 6 islands in the distance. This was the place. If Xia Guining did not make things worse, even if Su Fengnian allowed the flying sword to enter Yuzhou, he would still have a chance of winning if he stayed in the escaped town. However, it was different now. Xia Guining's intentions were far-reaching. Not only did he want the sword to break the fate of Chicken Soup Monk, he also wanted to break the fate of Su Fengnian and Bailiang. If they fought at the foot of Wudong Mountain, even if Su Fengnian successfully received the sword, once the scattered sword aura escaped, it would still bring disaster to Bailiang. In that case, he would still lose, and he could not afford to lose. If he wanted to fight, he could only fight outside of Bailiang's border. Su Fengnian gently exhaled. He put 2 fingers together and pointed to the sky. He smiled and said, "The first sword, the sword starts at the border." Apart from the flying sword under his feet, the 2,400 swords scattered in an instant. All of them had their swords pointed upwards and hovered in the sky above the border of Yuzhou province. Then, Su Fengnian retracted his fingers, bent his arms, and suddenly swung them outwards. Second sword, armored cavalry in formation. After dispersing, the 2,400 or so swords, which had originally appeared rather thin, actually grew from 1 sword to 100 swords in an instant. In the sky above the eastern border of Yuzhou province, a sword net seemed to have been set up. It was as if close to 300,000 Bailiang cavalry were here in formation. After setting up this magnificent sword formation that had almost exhausted all of his spirit, Su Fengnian didn't just stand in the middle of the sword formation and quietly wait for the uninvited guest. Su Fengnian tightly pursed his lips. His eyes were resolute. If an outsider saw Su Fengnian for the first time, the first thing they would see would be his pair of red phoenix eyes. If they looked carefully, other than feeling that he had an outstanding appearance, they would also notice his slightly thin lips. It was inevitable that they would guess that such a person must have a cold temperament. Bailiang has 300,000 border soldiers, and Bailiang has millions of families living in poverty. Today, let me, the king of Bailiang who feels guilty towards you, not feel so guilty. Su Fengnian raised his hand and rubbed his face hard. He said softly, "Old Huang, Wenhua, the old man in the sheepskin fur coat, I'm very happy to have met you in this life. I don't need to apologize to the 3 of you, because I know you don't want to hear it at all." Su Fengnian lowered his head and smiled. Then let's go. Su Fengnian took in a deep breath, but didn't exhale. He took a step and rushed towards Dansha Peak where the sea of clouds was roiling. Su Fengnian's figure dropped rapidly. He stepped on the top of Dansha Peak and then shot up. After landing on the next peak, his figure leapt up again, constantly borrowing the power of this great mountain. Accompanied by the shocking rumbling of the rolling rocks, Su Fengnian, who had no more mountains to land on, opened his 5 fingers. His entire body collided with a dazzling white rainbow that cut through the sky. Yuzhou was 100 li away from the border. High up in the sky. When Su Fengnian's palm collided with the tip of the sword, the originally vast cloud of clouds exploded and completely dissipated. There were no clouds for 10,000 li. The sword that Su Fengnian's palm blocked was flowing with purplish gold light. It was actually 10 feet long, but as thin as a willow leaf. Therefore, this sheathless sword was all sword tip. It was the largest sword furnace in the Donghua sword pool that had been sealed for nearly 200 years, the Dafeng sword furnace. It was said that the last emperor of the Dafeng dynasty had once thrown an heirloom imperial jade seal into the furnace. Therefore, the fate of the Dafeng sword furnace was preserved until today. The furnace was quietly opened at the end of the auspicious year of the Li Yang auspicious year. The furnace fire was so strong that it could be faintly seen from 10 li away. The Donghua sword pool had no choice but to build 4 tall buildings that reached the clouds around the sword furnace. Qi cultivators of the supporting dragon sect waited outside the buildings to conceal the sword aura and fire. Su Fengnian was knocked back more than 10,000 feet by the collision of the sword. He was pushed back more than 2 li. Even Tuoba Bodhisattva's all-out attack, Dong Tai's all-out attack, or even Wang Xianji at her peak, would not have such power. Su Fengnian's mind was clear of distracting thoughts. All the qi in his body madly gathered at the point where his palm and the tip of the sword collided. Although the incomparably sharp tip of the sword had not yet pierced through Su Fengnian's palm, Su Fengnian was well aware that as long as there was a small opening, even if the opening was insignificant, it was very likely that he would be defeated like a landslide. Chapter 1545. The nameless sword, which had come from the Donghua sword pool to the sky above River Province in a spurt of energy, seemed to have the intelligence of a human. After being enraged, its aura increased instead of decreasing. The sword qi swirled chaotically, illuminating Su Fengnian's purple-gold aura. The chilling sword light had solidified, whipping Su Fengnian's body. Ripples appeared on his robe that was flowing with aura energy. The sword swept past Donghua Path, Guangling Path, Gongnamdu Path, and Huainan Path. One sword light chilled 19 provinces. At this moment, it had almost reached the peak. Its momentum was unstoppable. Su Fengnian pressed his palm against the sword tip. In order to weaken the terrifying momentum of the sword, he had no choice but to bend his knees slightly and lean his body forward. One man and one sword dragged a thick trail of smoke and mist in the sky. They passed Bo's Peak, Zishou Peak, and Old Man Peak. Su Fengnian's retreating figure passed 3 peaks in a row. He was less than 50 li away from the sword formation at the border of Yuzhou. Su Fengnian's robe was covered in hard frost. The aura that leaked out of his body was clearly not enough to disperse the frenzied sword intent. When Su Fengnian saw Goddess Peak from the corner of his eye, he finally let out a breath. The sword tip pierced his palm instantly. Blood splattered. Su Fengnian used the sword tip as a fulcrum and leaned his body forward. His posture was like pushing a mountain with one hand and shaking Kunlun with his strength. They passed Goddess Peak, Jiazi Peak, and Dansha Peak. They passed 3 more mountains. The sword tip had completely pierced Su Fengnian's palm and slightly peeked out from the back of his hand. Su Fengnian was expressionless. He stretched out his left hand and placed it on the back of his right hand. The aura in Su Fengnian's body circulated for 800 li in an instant, surging like the tide of Guangling River. 2 palms, 1 horizontal and 1 vertical. Layered thunder. But in the short 3 li, the sword tip still peeked out from the back of Su Fengnian's left hand. The sword tip was only an inch long, but it had a lofty aura. Su Fengnian stomped his foot. Thunderous roars could be heard from the ground of River State. He allowed the tip of the sword to pierce his back another inch. The momentum of the sword finally paused. The scarlet blood flowed down the back of Su Fengnian's hand and into his sleeve, and then quickly condensed into a pool of blood frost. Although the forward momentum of the long sword had been forcibly stopped, it did not mean that the momentum of the sword had begun to decline. Almost every time Su Fengnian retreated 1 li, the tip of the sword would pierce through the back of Su Fengnian's second hand by half an inch. It was only 20 miles away from the border of Yuzhou province. The long sword began to draw an arc in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed downwards as it fell towards the land of Yuzhou. Su Fengnian leaned forward and gradually straightened his body. A traveler straightens his lapel when he is close to home. The tip of the long sword touched Su Fengnian's right chest. It was just a hair's breadth away from piercing through. The 20 or so flying swords behind Su Fengnian buzzed at the same time. After gathering together, they sounded like drums in the battlefield, resounding through the clouds. Bleeding from the 7 orifices. Su Fengnian was already bathed in blood. In particular, his face, which was not covered by the long robe, was constantly seeping blood. Before the dense sword energy could clear it, fresh blood would flow out. 10 li. The long sword had already pierced through his chest. Su Fengnian had maintained his posture from beginning to end with his palms pressed against the sword. He lowered his head to look at the sword. The blood obstructed his eyes, so his vision was somewhat blurry. Su Fengnian twitched the corner of his mouth and lightly spat out a mouthful of blood onto the sword. "I'm not having a good time, but aren't you also on the verge of collapse?" The long sword hummed, stirring up the flesh of Su Fengnian's wound. 5 li. The long sword of 1 zhang. 5 zhang was in front of Su Fengnian. The other 5 zhang was behind Su Fengnian. No one could imagine such a tragic scene. 3 li. The sword array was silent. Just like when the Northern Liang Steel Cavalry truly launched a charge to the death, there were no shouts from the other armies. The sword had already pierced through 7 zhang. Su Fengnian's lips moved slightly, but his words were unclear. When he was young, his mother said with a smile, "Xiaonian, you have to remember, the Su family is the gateway to the Central Plains." It had nothing to do with who the Liang Emperor was, and it had nothing to do with whether the people of the Central Plains scolded the Su family or not. The man who had never dared to talk back to the princess said boldly for the first time, "Xiaonian, don't take it seriously, don't take it seriously. War is not fun. Don't try to be a hero if you can. What's wrong with my son, Su Shao? Must he sacrifice his life for the country? There's no such thing." Su Fengnian just said to himself, "Mother, I'll listen to you, not my father." 2 li. Behind him were the barren mountains and rivers of Yuzhou. The long sword had already pierced through 8 zhang. It wanted to struggle mightily between the weakening and exhaustion of its momentum. Su Fengnian's palms clenched into fists. His palms were badly mangled and his bones could be seen. He tightly gripped the long sword, which was only 3 zhang sharp, and pulled it out. 1 li. Su Fengnian staggered backward, but his hands were tightly pressed against his chest, tightly gripping the tail of the long sword. He didn't want to let go. Half a li. Su Fengnian continued to hold the tail of the long sword with one hand, while his other hand went behind his back and gripped the tip of the sword that had pierced through his chest. Beiliang's million-strong army is pressing down, but Liangzhou's Huda city and Yozhou's Xiaoguang city are still there. As long as one person in the city is still alive, the city is still there. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. Beiliang was unwilling to fight to the death and retreat. "Because we can't retreat." Su Fengnian didn't break the long sword with his bare hands. Instead, he broke the Wenzhong's sword with brute force. After the sound of the long sword breaking, it seemed like a long period of time had passed. In the end, Su Fengnian bowed his head and stood to the east of the sword formation. He was only a few feet away from the solemn sword formation. Both of his hands were holding a broken sword. This 10,000 li sword could pass through the 4 paths and 19 provinces of Liang, but it couldn't take a single step into Beiliang. After the long sword was broken, the millions of strands of sword energy scattered in all directions. They were all blocked by the sword formation outside of Yuzhou. This summer, Great Peace City, where the sun was high in the sky, rained heavily. Sword Rain. Chapter 1546. When the white-robed monk transformed into a rainbow and arrived at the border of the Sea of Clouds, he saw the scarlet figure sitting cross-legged on the sword facing the east. Li Dongxin suddenly stopped. Like flowing water, he stood still in the sky like a landscape painting. The white-robed monk looked at the wind and clouds that had been caused by the sword formation breaking through the air. He said, "Of the remaining 120,000 flying swords, half of them will not reach Great Peace City. Beiliang has this poor monk to help you stop the immortals from taking advantage of the situation. Great Peace City is even more so. This is unnecessary. It is better to save your will and use it to strengthen your foundation." Su Fengnian still held the 2 pieces of the sword that had lost its sharpness but still had its edge. He said softly, "I could not control myself." "You are still young." The white-robed monk shook his head and said with a smile, "Put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you were the emperor of Liang and watched as the Jianghu people and scholars brought their fates into Beiliang, would you be able to endure it? Great Peace City's original intention was to use this sword to cut off your fate. But Xia Guining added fuel to the fire and it became a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. According to the thoughts of Qi Yanglong, Huan Wen, and Yin Mao Chen, even if they want you to die, they should wait until the Beimang army and the Beiliang cavalry are both heavily injured. If you die too early, it is not beneficial to the plan of Liang that Zhang Julu had planned. Su Fengnian raised his elbow and wiped the blood off his face. Xia Guining wants the world to be in chaos. He doesn't just want to gain fame from the Guangling battlefield, he also seems to want Qin Jibao to replace me as the king of the Northwest. That's right, as long as I die, the 3 fronts of Beiliang will be shaken. The closest one to Beiliang is Huainan Jidushi Kainan. Yan Wenluan probably won't let him enter Yuzhou, let alone holding the imperial edict to take over the command of the Beiliang frontier army. And the king of Shu Qin Jibao, who has a good reputation in Beiliang, is undoubtedly the best choice. Even if the Liang imperial court is unwilling, they can only agree. After all, with Qin Jibao in the northwest and monopolizing the power, it is better than Beiliang fighting on their own. In the end, Beimang will break through the border and encroach on the central plains. Of course, in this way, apart from the Beiliang cavalry, Qin Jibao also has Shishu and Nanzhao as strategic depth. This is equivalent to completing the best situation that my master, Li Shan, originally envisioned. To the Zhaosher of Liang, it is no different from a dove quenching its thirst. But there is no other way. Without this poisonous wine to quench their thirst, they will die even faster. The white-robed monk touched his bald head and said helplessly, "Just listening to it gives me a headache. You people of the imperial court, don't you feel tired?" Su Fengnian dismissed this with a smile. He turned his head and asked with a grin, "Zen Master, have you received the east-west and north-south commands?" The white-robed monk made a sound of acknowledgement and then did not say anything else. Su Fengnian waited for a long time but did not hear anything. Finally, the white-robed monk turned his head and looked at the young man who was sitting on the sword in the air. He said slowly, "The sword under your butt is trembling. How long are you going to pretend to be a master? Do you really think you are an immortal who eats the clouds, drinks the dew, and drinks the wind? Su Fengnian's face was extremely embarrassed. The white-robed monk lifted his sleeve and gently waved it. Su Fengnian turned around with his sword and rushed towards Mount Wudong. The white-robed monk flew beside him and said indifferently, "I am only sending you back to Wuxia town to help you pay back the money. Don't ask for a yard after getting an inch. You want me to help you scare Qi Jiajie and Chai Qingshan." Even if he didn't have energy to protect his body, there was still a cool breeze blowing gently, and he didn't feel the slightest bit of coldness when it brushed past his face. Even Su Fengnian exclaimed endlessly in his heart. This is a Buddhist sect divine ability that can form a small world of 10 feet in all directions. Was it Dong Tai's sword? Or was it the Confucian sage Chao Chongqing who had turned into a tyrant? Su Fengnian thought about it carefully and found that the chances were slim. Perhaps guessing Su Fengnian's thoughts, the white-robed monk laughed and said in a self-deprecating manner, "This penniless monk is only good at taking a beating. I can't compare to you, Su Fengnian, who was able to completely withstand that sword strike. If it were this penniless monk, although that sword strike could not harm this penniless monk at all, this penniless monk would definitely not be able to stop it from invading northern Liang. What, do you want to steal this Buddhist skill? I advise you to give up this idea, unless you are not king of Beiliang and shave your head bald one day." Su Fengnian hurriedly shook his head gently and looked down. The culprit's sword that was placed on his leg had severely injured his physique. The injury looked frightening, but the hole in his chest had actually started to be mended by the moving red threads, showing signs of stopping the bleeding. Su Fengnian estimated that he would need to recuperate for about half a year before he could fully recover. During this period of time, he might not even be able to defeat a grandmaster like Qi Jiajie, let alone Tuoba Bodhisattva. However, compared to the damage to his own qi that was easy to disperse and difficult to gather, the situation was already much better. After all, his body could slowly recover, and his qi dynamic and divine will could also be like a pond that slowly stored water. There would be a day when it would be full. The amount of water in a pond and the width of the pond depended on the strength of a martial artist's body. The more obscure depth was related to the qi and tao of the void. After Huang Sanja scattered the fate of the dynasty into Jianghu, Wang Xianji possessed both. Therefore, he dominated martial emperor city for 60 years. Tuoba Bodhisattva and Huyen Guanyin belonged to the former, and Xia Guanyin was the latter. The white-robed monk who could always accurately grasp Su Fengnian's thoughts looked at the Wudong peaks in the distance and sighed. From the perspective of a qi cultivator, fate is something that everyone has, but there is a great disparity. Emperors, kings, generals and ministers naturally have more than commoners. However, why is there a saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it? The simple words "the will of the people" have already revealed the secret of heaven. Heaven and earth are parents, just like a pair of strict father and loving mother. There are gods 3 feet above the head. Heaven's net is wide, but it does not escape. The earth produces 5 grains to nourish people, and a gentleman carries things with great virtue. When I was traveling to the west, Huang Longshi sent me off. When I returned, I was greeted by Huang Longshi. This person has always been mysterious. Once, he accidentally said that after flipping through the books, Su Fengnian was just a character who left because of fate, while Chen Jibao was the person who was born to slay both the dragon and the python. Therefore, you should have died in the battle at the border, leaving behind infamy in the annals of history for thousands of years. The white-robed monk probably knew that Su Fengnian was unable to speak frankly. He answered his own question, "I have been staying in the 2 Zen temples for so many years. I often ask myself, why is there someone who can become a Buddha in this life, but not in the next life? Is it because those who become a Buddha will not become a Buddha? Buddhism has spread to the east, and when in Rome, do as the Romans do." The difference between Mahayana and Hinayana is becoming more and more obvious. I dare to say that there is an epiphany, and then put down the butcher's knife to become a Buddha. Sometimes, this penniless monk is also worried that this step might be a little too big. Actually, it is a good thing for Hinayana to abandon the world and pursue nirvana by oneself. It is even better for Mahayana to benefit the heavens, and to be merciful to others. Su Fingnian said with difficulty, "Isn't it still a headache?" The white-robed monk nodded, "That's right." As they approached Mount Wudong, the lotus tip turned into an island in the sea of clouds. The white-robed monk suddenly said, "In the future, you might go to Great Peace City twice, but that is only a possibility. Just treat it as me prattling on and pretending to be mysterious. Don't worry too much." Su Fingnian smiled, "I thought it would only be once." At this moment, strange movements appeared on the shoulders and sleeves of the white-robed monk's robes. It was as if hooks were tearing at the robes. Li Dongxin only waved his sleeves casually and patted his shoulders. Su Fingnian's expression was solemn. He subconsciously reached out to grab the broken sword on his knees. Immortals sat high in the 9 heavens, fishing with their rods. Those fishing lines that even chi cultivators could not see fell into the mortal world. At this moment, many of the hooks happened to hook onto the white-robed monk. The white-robed monk shook his head and smiled, "Don't worry. As a member of the 3 religions, it is more troublesome." Su Fingnian could not help but curse inwardly. How could he not care? Anyone would not be able to keep their cool when the immortals who were fishing for luck in the heavens were tearing at their clothes like this. However, Zen Master, you are padding here and there like you are swatting flies. I can only follow you and not care. Su Fingnian smiled for no reason, "Zen Master, you are making such a big commotion before the fight. Han Gui of Green Mountain Monastery is under a lot of pressure." The white-robed monk chuckled, "This is what my daughter taught me. She said that when the Jianghu people at the foot of the mountain fight, before their fists hit their opponents, they would first perform a set of majestic fist stances on the spot. Not only can it boost their courage, it can also earn the cheers of others." Su Fingnian forced a smile and laughed, "You are indeed an experienced Jianghu person." Near the summer escape town at the foot of Mount Wudong, the white-robed monk gently pushed Su Fingnian down on his sword. A voice came from behind, "Change your clothes before you see the thing. Otherwise, if she knows that you are in such a miserable state under my watch, I will be nagged for a long time. My ears will not be able to have peace. You have to know that my daughter's lion's roar of Buddhism is 80% inherited from her mother." After hearing this, Su Fingnian smiled knowingly. In the blink of an eye, he landed in the sky above the summer escape town. He stood up and the flying sword of will dissipated by itself. Su Fingnian held the 2 pieces of the broken sword in his left hand. After he pulled out Qi Jiajia's long sword, he was more seriously injured than he was. His body was not bad, but his heart of the sword was almost destroyed. In this lifetime, he would not be able to make a breakthrough in the realm of the sword. Therefore, Su Fingnian really had to be wary of Chai Qingshan, who had chosen to stand aside for some reason. Chapter 1547. When Su Fingnian's feet landed on the street, without the protection of the white-robed monk's 10 feet of pure land, a mouthful of blood surged up to his throat. He forced himself to swallow it back down. In fact, it had only been an hour since Su Fingnian left on his sword. The situation in the town had already stabilized. Under the suppression of Luo Hongcai's 500 horsemen and Sui Tiashan's men of sacrifice from the whisk room, the injured Wang Yuanran and the others had been detained. Qi Jiajia had also let Yin Chongying and the other nobles return to the inn. He stood on the street with Li Yibai and Chai Qingshan. Soldiers continued to arrive from both inside and outside the town. Even the most senior member of Wudong Mountain, Yu Xingrui, had come to the edge of the town and stood on a mud wall. Although he had not entered the town to confront the 2 sword masters, the Wudong Taoist, who was the only one who cultivated strength among the 6 brothers, was obviously here to block their retreat. When the 2 children, Song Tinglu and Shan Yi, saw Su Fingnian covered in blood, they were dumbstruck. After learning the general inside story from their master and Qi Jiajia's conversation, the boy was shocked that this person surnamed Su could actually withstand the sword. The girl in white, on the other hand, was in a completely different state of mind. She almost felt that her heart was about to break. Her beautiful eyes overflowing with spiritual qi were vaguely teary. Her knuckles were white as she tightly clutched the record of sword practice of Qingshui Pavilion. Su Fengnian waved his hand at Luo Hongkai and Sui Taizhan, indicating that they could withdraw from the town. The 500 horsemen and 70 Jin horsemen retreated like the tide. The men of sacrifice and archers on the roof also withdrew. It was done in one breath and without a sound. Precisely because of this silence, the momentum became more powerful. It especially shocked Chai Qingshan, who had been the chief guest of the Spring Snow building for more than 10 years. Guangling Dao could be said to have a strong military force, but among so many elite troops, only the troops trained by Hingjiang General Song Li could be compared to the troops stationed in Beiliang, except for the Lord's personal guards. Su Fengnian did not see the east and west girls and the north and south little monks. They should have started to climb the mountain after shopping. Su Fengnian said to Qi Jiajia and Chai Qingshan, "Shall we go into the inn and talk?" Chai Qingshan smiled and said, "Why not?" Qi Jiaj, who had a long saber hanging from his waist, remained silent. Song Tingla was about to sit down, but Li Bai's collar and Chai Qingshan's and Qi Jiajia took their seats one after another. Chai Qingshan and Qi followed. Chai Qingshan and Chai and Qi followed, Chai and Chai Qingshan and of Qi and of the room of, he. Chai. Of Li of, sky of heaven s, and walked, alone, of heaven of time, and asked, of his, of. Su Fengnian gently put the two pieces of the sword on the table. One of them was longer than the table, while the other was as short as a dagger. He smiled and said, "Young Master Yin, please sit down. Prisoners on death row can still eat their last meal." Yin Chongying's face stiffened. When he saw the wound on Su Fengnian's chest that was bleeding the most, he quickly sat down and lowered his eyes. Qi Jiajie sat upright and still with his eyes closed. Chai Qingshan studied the two pieces of the sword with great interest. Although the sword came from the Donghua Sword Pool's Dafeng Sword Furnace, except for the group of old swordsmiths in the sect, even he, the sect master, did not take a look at it. Before it was formed, the sword was like a girl waiting to be married, but it was already famous. Chai Qingshan, who was in the sword pool, felt its sword aura the most. But it was a pity that such a peerless sword, which had never been seen before and would never be seen again, died as soon as it was married. At the moment, the only thing left of the broken sword was its sharpness. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to speak. The atmosphere in the inn was solemn. At this moment, the girl with the sword on her back who did not follow her master into the inn ran in with a pile of clothes, shoes, and socks that she had just bought. In fact, it could not be said that she had bought them, as the shop had closed long ago. She had kicked the door open, picked out the clothes, and threw down a bag of silver. Shan Yi said timidly, "King of Beiliang, you gave me a secret manual, and I'll give you a set of clothes in return. Is that okay?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If it's a business deal, I'll lose a lot. But if it's a favor, then it doesn't matter. Miss Shan, just put the clothes on the table. I'll change them before I climb the mountain." Song Tingla stood on her tiptoes with an anxious expression and whispered in the ear of her slender senior brother, Li Bai, senior brother, what should we do? With junior sister like this, is she going to stay in Beiliang and not return to our sword pool? Su Fengnian ignored the youth's worries and said straightforwardly to Qi Jiajie, "If this sword is successful, you will improve the path of the sword, and the imperial court will be reassured. In reality, I admire you. Everyone says that the sky is high and the emperor is far away. But you have schemed to do this. You really think highly of me, a person who is no longer in the Jianghu. Someone has done something to the sword. You already know, Qi Jiajie. I won't beat around the bush with you. You, Qi Jiajie, scram back to Great Peace City today. You are not allowed to use the sword for 10 years. Also, help me send a message to your master. I will find a chance to talk with him, just like we are now. Qi Jiajie suddenly opened his eyes. What, you have no intention of talking? Su Fengnian, who had been using his sleeves to cover his hands, slowly raised his arm, bent 2 fingers, and tapped on the extremely long broken sword. It was too much for the eyes to take in. At the same time, Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, breaking a willow and sending people away is not just a custom of the Central Plains. Beiliang has it as well. But Beiliang is not like you. Once people leave here, many people will not be able to come back. I wonder if you, Qi Jiajie, will do as the Romans do when you arrive in Beiliang. The broken sword, more than 1 zhang long, was broken into dozens of pieces. The pieces of the broken sword rose into the air and spun lightly on the table like willow leaves leaving the branches and moving with the wind. Qi Jiajie snorted coldly. He seemed to be venting his anger, but everyone present knew that this was Mr. Qi showing weakness. The willow leaf slowly fell back to the table. Yin Chongying, whose heart had been in his throat, seemed to be relieved of a great burden. Sweat had seeped out of the young master's forehead. But in the next moment, Yin Chongying felt a cool breeze in his face. Then he was knocked back and fell to the ground with his chair. The entire table had been split in half. Chai Qing-shan turned his head and saw Su Fengnian had one hand around Qi Jiajie's neck. This Mr. Qi's back was pressed against the wall of the inn, his feet off the ground. The long saber at Qi Jiajie's waist was only half out of its scabbard. Su Fengnian had one hand around Qi Jiajie's neck, one hand behind his back. He raised his head to look at the best swordsman of the capital whose energy had exploded. He said with a smile, under the precondition of receiving the same level of injury, it is not as hard to kill you, Qi Jiajie, as you think. It is impolite not to reciprocate. Later, I will have Mr. Yin, who definitely hates you, take your head back to Great Peace City. As the sword master's energy quickly weakened, the long saber slowly slid back into its scabbard. Chai Qing-shan, who was thinking quickly, did not move in the end. He sighed in his heart. This young man was really ruthless to the enemy and even more ruthless to himself. In order to kill Qi Jiajie, this young vassal king looked so relaxed, but the blood on his body that had just shown signs of drying would probably add another 7 or 8 tails of blood. Su Fengnian let go of his hand. The already dead Qi Jiajie sat limply against the wall. The man and woman on the second floor, Zhao Chenyuan and Gao Shiqing, both covered their mouths, not daring to let themselves cry out. Gao Shilian and Han Xingyan both gasped. For the first time, the young Zhao Wenwei paid attention to this vassal king of Liyang who did not listen to orders, instead of paying more attention to the white-clothed girl Shan Bai. Different from the shock and fear of his brothers and sisters, this young man who had only read frontier poems in books did not panic. Instead, the young man looked down at everyone's reaction. The seemingly expressionless swordsman Chai Qing-shan, whose left hand tightly gripped the chair's handle. Yin Chongying, whose hands were slightly trembling, re-straightened the chair. He hesitated for a moment before sitting down, and the young vassal king who slowly sat back down with a smile on his face. At that moment, Zhao Wenwei, who had admired his brother-in-law Yin Chongying since childhood, began to change his mind rapidly. The secret words that he did not listen to before, no matter what his father said, suddenly became clear to him. Especially the sentence, Wenwei, that Yin Chongying is just a prime minister in peaceful times. He can't be the chief secretary in troubled times. It may not be a blessing for our Zhao family to have such a son-in-law. Su Fingnian smiled at Chai Qingshan and said, Mr. Chai, I was surprised that you could hold back and not make a move. Chai Qingshan replied, Your Highness couldn't hold back and made a move. This commoner was even more surprised. Su Fingnian, whose body reeked of blood, glanced at Chai Qingshan's 2 disciples and said, Mr. Chai has taken in 2 good disciples. There is hope for Donghua sword pool to rise again. Although Song Tingla regarded this elegant but ruthless vassal king as a great enemy, he still couldn't help but straighten his back when he heard these words. Nonsense, being praised by one of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts evaluation, if this spread to Jianghu, he, Song Tinglu, would become famous overnight. In the future, when he left the sect to travel Jianghu, wouldn't he easily have friends all over the world? Chai Qingshan laughed heartily and said, Then I will take advantage of your highness' auspicious words. Su Fingnian smiled at the young Song Tinglu and said, I heard that you want to be the second when bushing to become famous in the capital. There are dozens of willow leaf flying swords on the table. I will give them to you. Do you dare to accept them? The young man raised his chin and said, Why wouldn't I dare? Chai Qingshan sighed helplessly. This troublemaker. These things were really troublesome to deal with. Su Fingnian really did put away the broken swords on the table. He stood up and said, Young Master Yin, I will have to trouble you to take me to Qi Jiaj's room. I will change my clothes so that I can go up the mountain. The white-clothed girl looked at Su Fingnian's bloody hands and hurriedly picked up the clothes and said, I will help my highness bring them upstairs. Chapter 1548. Chai Qingshan felt even more helpless. Damned girl, did she want the entire world to think that Sword Pool had something going on with Beiliang? Yin Chongying took Su Fingnian up the stairs, the young girl following closely behind. His companions at the stairs had already retreated to their rooms. Song Tingla rested his head on the table and laughed foolishly. Li Bai teased, with a new sword, you don't have to worry about your shimmy. The youth stared at the willow leaf swords that he liked the more he looked at them. He twisted his mouth and said, In any case, I can't win against Su Fingnian. I'll just leave it to fate. Chai Qingshan slapped the back of his disciple's head. Look at you. Stopping at the end of the corridor on the 2nd floor, Yin Chongying said softly, This is Mr. Qi's room. Without waiting for Su Fingnian to act, the young girl in white cleverly pushed open the door like a servant girl. Su Fingnian stood at the door and said to Yin Chongying, If you have the guts, when you return to Great Peace City, tell Yin Maochun that the king of Shu, Chen Jibao, has Xie Guining supporting him and is like a tiger that has grown wings. Once he establishes his authority in Guangling Road, this person's threat to the court will not be below mine, Su Fingnian. Of course, whether you say it or not is up to you, Yin Chongying. Also, I can't force it. Yin Chongying seemed to have made a decision with great difficulty. He suddenly said in a low voice, Wang Yi, can I come in for a chat? Su Fingnian stilled and then smiled. No matter. The young girl with a sword on her back, her face slightly red, was busy. Not only did she put down the clothes, she even put the sword on her back on the table. She did not treat him as an outsider at all. At this time, she was carrying a wooden basin out. She saw Yin Chongying walk in. After her shock, she did not ask anything. She only said to Su Fingnian shyly, Wang Yi, I will go boil a basin of hot water for you. Wang Yi may have to wait a while. Su Fingnian joked, Go, go. But this time, I have nothing to give you. The young girl lowered her head and walked out of the house in small steps. When she reached the corridor, she began to jump up and down. With the girl's interruption, Yin Chongying's mood calmed down a bit. He closed the door and sat down after Su Fingnian. Yin Chongying did not take advantage of the situation to sit down. He just stood there. Just as he was about to speak, he found that Su Fingnian covered his mouth with his hand. Shocking blood flowed out from between his fingers, especially the large pool of blood on his chest. Yin Chongjing could not help but wonder, even if he was a martial arts great master, was it really okay to bleed so much? Su Fengnian's throat moved slightly. After he put down his hand, he took a deep breath and said with a smile, although your Mr. Qi didn't draw his sword before he died, the 18 strands of sword qi that he gave me are raging in my heart. I have no choice but to ask you to make it short. Yin Chongjing did his best to not smell the pungent smell of blood. He quickly thought of the right words and said, Has your Highness heard that Tantanon has the intention of giving up the position of provincial master? Out of the corner of his eye, Yin Chongjing saw Su Fengnian reach out a hand and press it against his abdomen. His 5 fingers were curved in a mysterious way, as if he was suppressing those sword qi. Su Fengnian's expression was amused. He nodded and said, I've heard. Your father and father-in-law both have a chance of taking over this position. Can this be considered keeping the goodies within the family? Yin Chongjing shook his head and said in a heavy voice, Xiao Yuling has always looked down on me. Part of this is because Xiao Yuling has great expectations for his youngest son, Xiao Wenwei. In reality, your Highness should be well aware that back then, my father was the first to leave Zhonglu, even earlier than Zhao Yuling, Yuan Gua, Han Lin, and the others. It was precisely because he had a disagreement with the old Grand Secretary on the matter of Beiliang. Su Fengnian smiled and interrupted him. There was a disagreement, but don't be in such a hurry to throw dirty water on Zhongjulu. Back then, Yin Chongjing was the first to leave Zhonglu. His disagreement with Beiliang's politics was only a small part of the reason. Most of it was the late emperor's intention. The late emperor needed to cultivate someone who could succeed Gu Lu and contend against Zhang Lu as a civil official. Unfortunately, the Green Party was disappointing, and the scholarly clique in Gangnam-do even more unbearable. Yin Chongjing tried twice in secret to rope them in, but he failed. That was why he had no choice but to stay in this corner of Hanlin Academy. Not only was the late emperor greatly disappointed, the one who should be even more disappointed should be Yuan Benshi. As a result, Yin Chongjing couldn't continue. As he spoke, Su Fengnian coughed from time to time. He continued, as expected, scholars are naturally not suited to discussing business face-to-face, but they do have a set of schemes behind the scenes. Fine, if you can't say it, I'll say it for you. Although your father and Zhao Yuling are relatives by marriage, they've never seen eye to eye. If I'm not wrong, your father's true best friend, the one he's willing to see as a kindred spirit, is only Han Lin, who's about to become the administrator of the Huainan Dao, right? What, you want me, Beiliang, to take care of the ambitious Sir Han? And what will your return be? Yin Chongjing suddenly felt somewhat lacking in confidence. He said softly, after Sir Han takes up his post in the Huainan Dao, he will immediately propose to the court that the administrator's mansion be moved to the border between Ji and Hezhou. Su Fengnian nodded. I understand. Yin Chongjing breathed a sigh of relief. If he continued to speak, there were some things that only the heavens and earth would know. It was truly too difficult to say. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Fine, you can return to Great Peace City at ease. As for the Huainan Dao and Jizhou, on the way back, tell that administrator to be at ease. Yin Chongjing wanted to speak, but hesitated. Su Fengnian laughed coldly. As for what should be done, Beiliang will naturally weigh the pros and cons. In short, we won't make things difficult for your father and Han Lin. In this transaction, your side will definitely be more profitable. Yin Chongjing bowed with clasped hands. Then Yin Chongjing will quietly wait for the good news. When Yin Chongjing quietly left the room, he discovered that the girl from the sword pool holding a basin of hot water was standing not too far away. Chapter 1549. Of course, Su Fengnian did not have the face to let a girl serve him. When he closed the door and took off his robe alone, he was somewhat puzzled. Why was it that the older he got, the thinner his skin became? After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Su Fengnian, who had finished bandaging his wound, opened the door again. The girl blinked her big eyes and did not speak. Su Fengnian rubbed her head and said softly, "Little girl, thank you. If you can wait until Beiliang is not at war, then you can come here to travel Jianghu." The scenery outside the Great Pass, although it is not as lush as the trees in Jiangnan of the Central Plains, is also very beautiful. The girl's eyes were somewhat resentful. The way he rubbed her hair was too much like a kind elder. Su Fengnian suddenly clasped his fist and smiled. He imitated the children of Jianghu and said loudly, "The green mountains do not change, the green water flows forever. We will meet again someday." The white-clothed girl was startled, and then she couldn't stop laughing. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide it, and she couldn't be reserved. Su Fengnian left in large strides. When he reached the outside of the restaurant, Luo Hongkai was already waiting at the door with his horse. Beside him stood the Imperial Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda, whose hands and feet were bound. There was also the Imperial Cavalry Commander Tao Nyocha, who had returned from Liangzhou to take up his post within the borders after being injured. Su Fengnian took the reins and looked at the platoon leader Tao, who had internal injuries and a pale face, before getting on the horse. He gave him a thumbs up. The young king rode away, leaving behind a trail of dust. Luo Hongkai gently kicked Fan Xiangda. Before he got on the horse, he heavily patted Tao Chei's shoulder and laughed. "Good job, this time you have made me proud." Tao Chei, who was almost slapped to the ground, smiled foolishly. Jin Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda was unhappy. Tao Chei turned his head and said, "Commandant Fan, pinch me. I am afraid I am dreaming." Fan Xiangda was amused and laughed. "Dreaming in broad daylight." Tao Chei said heroically, "Commandant Fan, today I will invite you and your brothers to drink wine together. There will be enough." Fan Xiangda was surprised and said, "With that little money of yours, you even send it to your family. Can it be enough?" Pottery Ox Cart chuckled and said, "Don't you have Commandant Fan to cushion it?" Fan Xiangda stared blankly for a moment before sneakily putting his arm around the corporal's shoulder. "Old brother Tao, let's discuss something. In any case, it's just the two of us and Field Officer Luo today." Field Officer Luo went to Wudong Mountain with His Highness. "Let's drink tonight. Why don't you tell your brothers that His Highness gave us a thumbs up?" Tao Nyocha said in all seriousness, "Commandant Fan, borrowing money is borrowing money. It's not like I won't return it. I, Tao Nyocha, am an honest man." Fan Xiangda sighed. Tao Oxcart lowered his voice and said, "If you borrow money and don't collect interest, then it's done. What do you think?" Fan Xiangda laughed and said, "No problem. Tomorrow I will treat you to another round of wine." In order to take care of Tao Nyocha, the two of them did not ride horses. The commandant and corporal walked side by side through the escaped summer town. Tao Nyocha's eyes suddenly became absent-minded and he said softly, "I am one of the last group of crossbowmen the governor who brought out. It's a bit late. Us field officers like to brag that they've seen the great general with their own eyes. During those years outside the pass, I was so envious. Commandant Fan, after His Highness leads us to defeat the Baimang barbarians, can we also tell the younger guys that we've seen His Highness with our own eyes back in the day? He's only 2 or 3 steps away." Fan Xiangda nodded and said in a low voice, "There will be such a day." When Su Fengnian and Luo Hongkai went up the mountain, Yu Xingrui was also there. Su Fengnian asked the old Taoist for an elixir and asked Luo Hongkai to give it to the Imperial Cavalry Corporal. It was not his idea. When Su Fengnian came to the front of the hut, Zhao Ningxin was sitting on a small stool. There was an empty stool next to him, and Mr. White Lotus was helping Su Fengnian move books to dry them. After Su Fengnian sat down, Zhao Ningxin, who was also a Taoist master of Mount Longhu like his uncle Zhao Danping, said flatly, if His Highness wants to punish me, I will not fight back. Su Fingnian sneered and said, not fight back. What can you do even if you fight back? Zhao Ningxin looked into the distance and said, I am willing to cultivate on Mount Wudong for 10 years. Su Fingnian glanced at the busy Mr. White Lotus and said with a smile, what? In order to let Mr. White Lotus go down the mountain safely, you are willing to give up the reputation of the Taoist Master Mansion. Bai Yu slowly got up, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and walked to Su Fingnian. He squatted beside the two and looked at the king of Bailiang with squinted eyes. He said with a smile, My Highness, let Zhao Ningxin go and I will stay. How about it? Su Fingnian smiled. This Mr. White Lotus was obviously more tactful than Qi Jiajia and even Yin Chongging. Bai Yu stretched out a finger. But I can only stay in Bailiang for 1 year. I will do my best in this 1 year. Su Fingnian stretched out a hand. 5 years. Mr. White Lotus shook his head. That is unreasonable. 1.5 years. 1.5 years at most. Su Fingnian sneered. 4 years. Just 4 years. I will give you face. Don't say 1 year less. 1 day less and there is no room for negotiation. Mr. White Lotus still shook his head. 4 years. The Central Plains will be too late. Besides, Bailiang doesn't need me to stay for 4 years. My Highness is a sensible man. 1.5 years is enough. The world is set. Su Fingnian withdrew 2 fingers. 3 years. If you bargain again, I will beat you. Oh, no, I mean Zhao Ningxin. Bai Yu suddenly sat down on the ground. Then you can beat him. I can't help you anyway. I can just watch the show. Su Fingnian hesitated for a moment, and finally said, for Zhao Zhu's sake, 2 years. If you talk nonsense again, I will beat you too. It was unknown where this scholar got the strength from, but he stood up with lightning speed. His figure was very vigorous. Mr. White Lotus bowed and said, 2 years it is. Su Fingnian quickly got up and helped Mr. White Lotus up. He said with a smile, Mr. White Lotus, are you still not used to our Bailiang? And when will you go to Mount Qingliang? Zhao Ningxin looked at the two with a blank face.